The faint hum of the satellite's transmission was abruptly severed by a burst of static, sharp and jarring. Dr. Elena Carter froze, her fingers hovering over the console. The room, once filled with the rhythmic beeps of data streams, now pulsed with an eerie silence. Then it came a signal, unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Crackling through the speakers, it was low and guttural, a language that sounded like it had crawled out of the void itself. Her breath hitched as the words formed, clear and unmistakable. The invasion has already begun. Her eyes darted across the screen, tracing the origin of the transmission. Coordinates flashed, but they didn't match anything in the database. It was coming from deep space, far beyond the edges of known star systems. Her heart pounded as she began to decode the message, each line more chilling than the last. The signal wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown, and whatever was out there, it wasn't just watching. It was already here. The room seemed to shrink around her, the weight of the discovery pressing down. She reached for the comms, her voice steady but urgent. "This is Dr. Carter. We need to assemble the team now." Outside, the stars glimmered coldly, unaware of the shadow creeping closer. The invasion had begun, and humanity was running out of time. The briefing room buzzed with a tense energy as Dr. Carter stood at the head of the table, her palms pressed against the polished surface. Around her, the faces of some of the world's leading scientists and military strategists reflected a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The signal's transcript glowed on the screen behind her, its alien language casting an ominous shadow over the room. "This isn't a drill," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "What we're dealing with is real, and it's already in motion. We need to act now." Colonel Marcus Holt leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "With all due respect, Doctor," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "this could easily be a prank or some kind of interference. We can't just mobilize resources based on a few lines of gibberish." His words hung in the air, heavy with doubt, and Dr. Carter felt the weight of his dismissal like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "Colonel," she replied, her voice steady but firm, "this isn't gibberish. The patterns, the encryption, it's intentional. Whoever sent this knows exactly what they're doing. And if we ignore it, we're gambling with the fate of the entire planet." The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in, yet Holt's eyes remained narrowed, his jaw tight with skepticism. Before the tension could escalate further, a sudden, deafening alarm blared through the facility. The lights flickered, then dimmed, plunging the room into an eerie half-light. Monitors flared with erratic static before going dark entirely. Dr. Carter's heart raced as she turned to the window overlooking the control room. Outside, the facility's power grid was collapsing in cascading failures, one section after another. "What the hell is going on?" Holt barked, rising to his feet. A technician burst into the room, his face pale. "We've lost primary and backup power," the surge came from. From the comms array, it's like something overloaded the system from the outside. Dr. Carter's stomach dropped. She knew what this meant. The signal wasn't just a warning, it was a test. And now, whatever had sent it was probing their defenses, searching for weaknesses. Holt's earlier skepticism evaporated as he barked orders into his radio, his voice sharp with urgency. "Lock down the facility, secure all entrances, and get me a status report on the perimeter, now." He turned to Dr. Carter, his expression grim. "You were right," he admitted, though the words seemed to cost him. "This isn't a hoax. Whatever's out there, it's playing for keeps." The room erupted into chaos as the team scrambled to respond. but Dr. Carter's mind was already racing ahead. The signal, the power surge, it was all connected, and if they didn't figure out how to fight back soon, humanity wouldn't stand a chance. The invasion wasn't just coming. It was already here. The chaos in the briefing room had barely subsided when a new development sent the team reeling. Deep beneath the facility, seismic sensors began to register unusual activity, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the bedrock itself. Dr. Carter, still reeling from the power surge, immediately recognized the pattern. It matched the frequency of the alien signal. "We need to check the lower levels," she said, her voice urgent. "There's something down there, and it's not natural." Colonel Holt nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by grim determination. Together, they led a small team into the facility's depths, descending through dimly lit corridors that grew colder with every step. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the echo of their boots against the metal floor. As they reached the lowest level, the pulsing grew louder, a steady thrum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Dr. Carter's breath fogged in the chilled air as they approached a sealed door marked Storage B12. The lock was old, rusted, but the pulsing was unmistakable now coming from the other side. With a nod from Holt, a technician forced the door open, the hinges screeching in protest. The room beyond was dark, save for a faint, otherworldly glow emanating from a massive object in the center. It was an artifact, unlike anything they had ever seen. Roughly spherical and covered in intricate, spiraling patterns, it pulsed with a rhythm that matched the seismic readings. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if the artifact were bending reality itself. Dr. Carter stepped closer, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. The patterns on the artifact's surface were familiar. They matched the encryption from the alien signal. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is what they were trying to tell us about. But before she could examine it further, her assistant, Liam, moved impulsively toward the artifact. "Wait," she shouted, but it was too late. His hand brushed against the surface, and the room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The energy surge was instantaneous, a shockwave that sent everyone sprawling. Dr. Carter's vision blurred as she hit the ground, her ears ringing from the deafening crack of energy. The artifact's glow intensified, bathing the room in an eerie, shifting light. She tried to call out to Liam, but her voice was lost in the chaos. One by one, the team members collapsed, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the artifact's activation. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the artifact's surface rippling like liquid, as if something inside were trying to break free. When Dr. Carter finally came to, the room was silent, the artifact's glow dimmed but still present. Her head throbbed and her limbs felt heavy, as though the energy surge had drained her completely. Around her, the rest of the team began to stir, their groans echoing in the cold, cavernous space. Liam was the last to wake, his face pale and his hands trembling. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice filled with guilt. I thought I could figure it out." Dr. Carter didn't have the heart to chastise him. The artifact's activation had changed everything. Whatever it was, a weapon, a beacon, or something else entirely, it was now clear that the alien presence wasn't just observing. They were actively manipulating their environment, testing their limits, and now, with the artifact awakened, the stakes had risen beyond anything they could have imagined. The invasion wasn't just here, it was inside the facility, and they were running out of time to stop it. The first thing Dr. Carter noticed when she regained consciousness was the absence of the artifact. The room, once bathed in its eerie glow, was now dark, save for the dim emergency lighting flickering weakly overhead. Her head still throbbed, and her body felt heavy, as though the energy surge had left a lingering weight on her limbs. She pushed herself up, scanning the room. The team was stirring, their groans echoing faintly in the cold, cavernous space. But the artifact, its pulsating light, its intricate patterns, was gone. Only a faint, scorched mark on the floor remained, a ghostly reminder of its presence. "Where is it?" Liam's voice broke the silence, shaky and filled with guilt. He was sitting up now, his hands trembling as he stared at the empty space where the artifact had been. Dr. Carter didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing, piecing together the implications. The artifact hadn't just vanished, it had been taken. And if something or someone had infiltrated the facility to remove it, that meant they weren't alone. Colonel Holt was already on his feet, barking orders into his radio. "I need a status report on all security systems, now." The response that crackled through was garbled, filled with static. "Sir, we've got a problem. The perimeter's sealed. Some kind of energy barrier we can't get through." Holt's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to Dr. Carter. "What the hell did that thing do?" Before she could respond, another alarm blared, sharp and piercing. The team scrambled to their feet, following Holt as he led them back to the upper levels. The facility, usually a hive of activity, was eerily silent. The power was still out, and the emergency lights cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. As they reached the main control room, the scene outside the windows stopped them in their tracks. The facility was surrounded by a shimmering, translucent barrier, a wall of energy that distorted the landscape beyond. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the air around it seemed to ripple as though it were alive. Outside, the barren terrain was no longer empty. Shadowy figures stood at the edge of the barrier, their forms indistinct but undeniably humanoid. They didn't move, didn't speak. They simply watched, their presence both menacing and unnervingly calm. Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. The figures were too far away to make out clearly, but their stillness was unnatural, almost predatory. It was as if they were waiting, observing, testing the team's reactions. "What are they?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Dr. Carter replied, her mind racing. "But they're not human, and if they're connected to the artifact, we're in deeper trouble than we thought." Holt stepped forward, his hand resting on the glass as he stared out at the figures. "We need to find a way out of here. If that barrier's keeping us in, it's only a matter of time before whatever's out there decides to come in." His tone was grim, but there was a flicker of determination in his eyes. The team moved quickly, setting up a makeshift command center in the control room. Dr. Carter began analyzing the energy readings from the barrier, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The data was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a complex web of frequencies and wavelengths that defied explanation. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a lock designed to keep them contained. Outside, the shadowy figures remained motionless, their presence a constant, silent reminder of the threat closing in. The facility, once a bastion of human ingenuity, now felt like a cage. The team worked tirelessly, but with every passing moment, the sense of urgency grew. The artifact was gone, the barrier was impenetrable, and the invaders, whoever or whatever they were waiting. As Dr. Carter stared at the data streaming across the screen, a chilling realization settled over her. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a game, and humanity was losing. The tension in the control room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of unspoken fears. Dr. Carter and Colonel Holt stood at opposite ends of the room, their conflicting strategies hanging between them like a storm waiting to break. Holt's voice was sharp, his military instincts driving his urgency. "We can't just sit here and analyze this. Those things are outside, and they're not here to chat. We need to hit them hard before they make the first move." His hand clenched into a fist, as if already imagining the strike. Dr. Carter, however, shook her head firmly, her scientific precision cutting through his aggression. "Colonel, we don't even know what we're dealing with. If we attack without understanding, we could escalate this into something we can't control. We need to study them, find their weaknesses, their patterns." Blind force isn't the answer. Her tone was calm but resolute, her mind already racing through the possibilities of what the figures might represent. Holt's eyes narrowed, his frustration boiling over. "Study them while they're surrounding us. That's a luxury we don't have, Doctor. Every second we waste is another second they could be planning our extinction." He turned to the team, his voice rising. "We have weapons, we have soldiers, we need to use them before it's too late." Before Dr. Carter could respond, a low hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls and floor. The monitors flickered, their screens distorting as the energy readings spiked. Outside, the barrier began to shimmer violently, its translucent surface rippling like water struck by a stone. The figures beyond it, once motionless, began to move in unison, their forms shifting as though preparing for something. The team froze, their argument forgotten as the hum grew louder, more insistent. Then, with a deafening crack, the barrier shattered. Shards of light disintegrated into the air, dissolving into nothingness. The figures stepped forward, their movements unnervingly fluid, their silhouettes becoming clearer with every step. They were tall, their bodies sleek and angular, their features obscured by a faint, glowing haze. Dr. Carter's heart pounded as she grabbed a tablet, frantically scanning the data. "They've overridden the barrier's frequency. They're adapting to our systems faster than I thought possible." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Holt didn't wait. He barked orders into his radio, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "All units, prepare for immediate engagement. We're under attack." He turned to Dr. Carter, his expression hardened. "You wanted to study them, fine, but we're not doing it unarmed." As the first wave of soldiers moved into position, the figures reached the edge of the facility. Their movements were deliberate, almost methodical, as if they were assessing every detail of their surroundings. One of them raised a hand, and a beam of light shot from its palm, carving through a reinforced wall like it was paper. The team ducked, debris raining down around them. Dr. Carter's mind raced. The figures weren't just powerful. They were precise, their actions calculated and efficient. This wasn't a mindless assault. It was a demonstration of superiority, a reminder that humanity was outmatched. Holt's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back. We need to regroup now." But as the team retreated, Dr. Carter lingered for a moment, her eyes locked on the figures. She didn't see just invaders, she saw a puzzle, a challenge. And if humanity was going to survive, they needed to solve it. The breach had changed everything. The argument between force and study was no longer theoretical. The figures were inside, and the clock was ticking. The invasion wasn't just at their doorstep, it was in their house, and the only question left was how to fight back. The room fell into stunned silence as the figures stepped fully into the light, their forms now unmistakable. They weren't shadows or silhouettes anymore, they were real. Translucent skin stretched over elongated limbs, their bodies shimmering faintly as though lit from within. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing and cold, and their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. The team froze, caught between awe and terror, as one of the figures raised a hand. Its fingers were long and slender, almost delicate, but the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. Then it spoke. The voice was unlike anything they'd ever heard, deep and resonant, yet distorted, as though filtered through layers of static and distance. The words were clear, though, each one landing like a hammer. "You are not ready for what comes next." The sound reverberated through the room, leaving a metallic taste in the air. Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't just speaking. It was inside her head, echoing in her thoughts as if it had bypassed her ears entirely. Before anyone could react, the figures began to dissolve. Their forms shimmered, breaking apart into countless particles of light that swirled for a moment before vanishing completely. The room, now empty, felt colder, the air heavier with the weight of what had just happened. The team stood in stunned silence, the echo of the alien's words lingering like a ghost. Colonel Holt was the first to break the silence. What the hell was that? His voice was low, but the edge of fear was unmistakable. Dr. Carter, still processing, turned to the nearest monitor, her fingers trembling as she pulled up the security footage. The figures had been there, she could see them clearly. But the moment they vanished, the recording glitched, the image distorting into static before returning to normal. It was as if they had erased themselves from existence. Liam, pale and visibly shaken, stepped forward. Did anyone else hear it in their head, not just their ears, but inside? His question hung in the air, and the nods that followed confirmed what they were all thinking. This wasn't just a physical invasion, it was psychological, a violation of their very thoughts. Dr. Carter's mind raced, piecing together the implications. The aliens' appearance, their ability to manipulate energy and communication. It all pointed to a level of technology far beyond humanity's reach. But it wasn't just their tech that was advanced, the way they moved, the way they spoke. It was calculated, deliberate. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a message, a warning, and then there was the voice. "You are not ready for what comes next." The words echoed in her mind, each syllable laden with meaning. Were they a threat, a prophecy, or something else entirely? She glanced at Holt, whose face was set in a grim mask. He was already thinking ahead, his military instincts kicking into overdrive. "We need to fortify this place," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "If they can just appear and disappear like that, we're sitting ducks." But Dr. Carter's thoughts were elsewhere. The aliens hadn't attacked. They hadn't destroyed the facility or harmed anyone. They'd simply delivered a message and left. Why, what were they waiting for? And more importantly, what was coming next? The team began to move, spurred into action by Holt's orders, but Dr. Carter remained still, her eyes fixed on the spot where the figures had stood. The invasion wasn't just physical. It was a test, a game of cat and mouse where humanity didn't even know the rules. And as the weight of that realization settled over her, one thing became painfully clear: they were running out of time to figure it out. The aliens had shown themselves, and now the real battle had begun. The room was still reeling from the aliens' sudden disappearance when Dr. Carter noticed something unusual on the floor where they had stood. A small, metallic object, no larger than a coin, glinted faintly in the dim emergency lighting. She knelt down, her breath shallow, and picked it up. It was warm to the touch, its surface smooth but etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with a soft, blue glow. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, holding it up for the others to see. Colonel Holt stepped closer, his military instincts on high alert. "What is it? Some kind of tracking device? Maybe," Dr. Carter replied, her fingers brushing over the surface. The patterns seemed to shift under her touch, as if responding to her presence. Before she could examine it further, the device activated on its own, emitting a low hum that vibrated through the room. A holographic projection burst from its center, filling the air above them with a three-dimensional map of Earth. The team stared in stunned silence as the map rotated slowly, its continents outlined in glowing lines. But what caught their attention were the markers, dozens of them, scattered across the globe. Each one pulsed with a sinister red light, and as Dr. Carter zoomed in on one, her stomach dropped. The marker wasn't just a symbol, it was a location, pinpointed with unnerving accuracy, and the nearest one was less than 10 miles away. That's the old mining facility outside the city," Liam said, his voice trembling. "What's going on there?" Dr. Carter's mind raced as she studied the map. The markers weren't random. They were clustered in specific areas: industrial zones, military installations, research facilities. Places of strategic importance, and they weren't just potential targets, they were already active. "This isn't a plan," she said, her voice tight with dread. "This is a status update. These points, they're already under alien control." The room erupted into chaos as the implications sank in. Holt barked orders into his radio, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get me a satellite feed of that mining facility, now." The response came back almost immediately, the image of the facility appearing on a nearby monitor. The team crowded around, their breaths held as the footage played. The facility was unrecognizable. What had once been a sprawling complex of warehouses and equipment was now a hive of alien activity. Strange, organic-looking structures had sprouted from the ground, their surfaces glistening like wet metal. Shadowy figures moved among them, their movements precise and mechanical. And at the center of it all was a massive spire, its tip glowing with the same eerie light as the artifact they had encountered earlier. "It's a command center, Dr. Carter said, her voice barely audible. "They're not just invading, they're building something." Holt's jaw tightened as he turned to her. "We need to hit that facility. If they're already that close, we can't afford to wait." But Dr. Carter shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the holographic map. "This isn't just about one facility. Look at the markers, they're everywhere. If we attack one, we risk alerting the others. We need to understand their strategy, their technology. If we go in blind, we're playing right into their hands." The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The aliens weren't just a threat, they were a force, methodical and calculated, with a plan that stretched across the globe. And as Dr. Carter stared at the holographic map, one thing became painfully clear. Humanity wasn't just fighting an invasion, they were fighting against time. The device in her hand hummed faintly, its blue glow casting shadows on her face. It wasn't just a map, it was a warning, and if they didn't figure out how to decode it soon, the invasion would no longer be a threat, it would be a reality. The holographic map flickered in Dr. Carter's hands, its glowing markers casting an eerie light across the room. She stared at the patterns, her mind racing to decode the implications. The markers weren't just scattered randomly, they formed a network, a web of interconnected points that stretched across the globe. Each one pulsed with a sinister rhythm, but it wasn't until she zoomed in on the timeline embedded in the map's data that the truth hit her like a thunderclap. "This isn't a countdown," she said, her voice low but steady, cutting through the tension in the room. "It's a timeline, these markers, they're not future targets. They're active sites, the invasion. It's been happening for years. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Colonel Holt stepped closer, his brow furrowed. What do you mean, years? Are you saying they've been here all along? Dr. Carter nodded, her fingers tracing the glowing lines on the map. The earliest markers date back at least a decade. They've been infiltrating us, planting sleeper agents, building their networks right under our noses. This isn't just an invasion, it's a takeover, and we didn't even see it coming. Liam, still pale from the earlier encounter, leaned in closer. But how? How could they have been here for so long without anyone noticing? That's the terrifying part, Doctor. Carter replied, her tone grim. They're not just physically here. They've been manipulating us, our systems, our technology, even our perceptions, the artifact we found. It's not just a tool, it's a key, and they've been using it to control us from the shadows. The realization hit the team like a wave, their earlier sense of urgency now tinged with a deeper, more insidious dread. The invasion wasn't a sudden, explosive event. It was a slow, methodical erosion of humanity's defenses, a silent war fought in the spaces between reality and perception. Holt's jaw tightened as he processed the information. If that's true, then we're already in the middle of this. We need to act now, gather evidence, figure out how they're operating. If we can expose them, maybe we can turn the tide. Dr. Carter agreed, her mind already racing ahead. The nearest marker is the mining facility. If we can get there, we might be able to find proof, something tangible that we can use to warn the world. The team moved quickly, gathering their equipment and preparing for the mission. The facility was less than 10 miles away, but the journey felt fraught with danger. Every shadow, every flicker of light seemed to carry the weight of the unknown. As they loaded into the armored vehicle, Dr. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But there was no other choice. The truth was out there, and if they didn't uncover it soon, humanity would lose the war before it even began. The drive was tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. The mining facility loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the night sky. The alien structures they had seen on the satellite feed were even more imposing up close, their surfaces glistening with an unnatural sheen. The team approached cautiously, their weapons drawn, but the facility was eerily quiet. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, the walls lined with the same organic material they had seen in the footage. The floor was slick, almost sticky, as if the aliens had reshaped the very building to suit their needs. Dr. Carter's breath fogged in the chill as she scanned the area, her eyes landing on a cluster of strange, pod-like structures. "What are those?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. Dr. Carter moved closer, her flashlight illuminating the pods. Inside, suspended in a gelatinous liquid, were humanoid figures sleek and angular, their features obscured by the haze. But as the light hit them, one of the figures stirred, its glowing eyes snapping open. The team froze, their hearts pounding as the pod began to crack open, the liquid spilling onto the floor. The figure inside stepped out, its movements fluid and deliberate, its gaze locking onto Dr. Carter. "You are too late," it said, its voice echoing in her mind just as the others had. "The integration is complete." The words sent a chill down her spine, but there was no time to process them. The facility came alive around them, the walls pulsing with light, the air filling with the hum of alien machinery. The invasion wasn't just here, it was everywhere, and now the team was standing in the heart of it, with no way out but through. The air inside the alien-infested mining facility was thick with an oppressive chill, every breath tasting metallic and wrong. Dr. Carter's flashlight swept across the cavernous space, illuminating walls that seemed to breathe, pulsating faintly with an otherworldly rhythm. The team moved cautiously, their boots sticking slightly to the slick, organic floor. Ahead, the cluster of stasis pods loomed like grotesque fruit hanging from twisted vines. Inside each one, human figures floated motionlessly, their faces eerily serene beneath the murky liquid that encased them. "These people, they're alive," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the alien machinery. He stepped closer to one of the pods, his breath fogging the glass. The figure inside, a woman in her mid-30s, looked almost peaceful, as if she were merely asleep, but the faint glow of the pod's interior hinted at something far more sinister. Dr. Carter's mind raced as she examined the nearest pod. The liquid wasn't just a preservative, it was laced with microscopic particles that seemed to be interacting with the captive's nervous system. "They're not just keeping them alive," she said, her voice tight with realization. "They're integrating them, using them." The implications were horrifying. The aliens weren't just invading, they were assimilating, repurposing human bodies for their own ends. But before she could delve deeper into the data streaming from her handheld scanner, a sharp, metallic clang echoed through the facility. The team spun around, weapons raised, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. From the shadows stepped a figure they all recognized, Agent Daniels, one of their own. His face was pale, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glowed faintly with the same unnatural light they had seen in the alien figures. "Daniels." Holt barked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" Daniels didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. When he finally spoke, his voice was distorted, layered with an alien resonance that sent chills down their spines. "You were never supposed to find this place," he said, his tone eerily calm. "But now that you have, I can't let you leave." The team froze, their weapons trained on him, but no one fired. This wasn't just an enemy, it was someone they had trusted, someone they had worked alongside for years. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Daniels, if you can hear me, fight it. Whatever they've done to you, you're stronger than this." For a moment, his expression flickered, a brief flash of humanity breaking through the alien control, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, mechanical smile. "I was never yours to control," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "I was always theirs." The revelation hit them like a sledgehammer. Daniels wasn't just a sleeper agent. He had been one of them all along, a Trojan horse planted deep within their ranks. The aliens hadn't just infiltrated their systems, they had infiltrated their trust. Before anyone could react, Daniels raised his hand, and the facility erupted into chaos. Alien machinery roared to life, the walls shifting and contorting, as if the building itself were alive. The stasis pods began to crack open, their contents spilling onto the floor as the captives inside stirred, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light. Holt grabbed Dr. Carter's arm, pulling her back as the team scrambled to retreat. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. But as they turned to run, the exit was blocked by a wall of organic material that had sprouted from the floor, its surface glistening and pulsating. They were trapped, surrounded by enemies both alien and familiar. Dr. Carter's mind raced, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The invasion wasn't just happening around them, it was happening within them. And if they didn't find a way to fight back soon, they wouldn't just lose the war, they'd lose themselves. The room seemed to close in around them as Daniels, or whatever he had become, stood motionless, his glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. The team was trapped, the organic walls pulsing with an unnatural life, the air thick with the hum of alien machinery. But just as Holt raised his weapon, a voice cut through the tension, sharp and unexpected. Wait, the team turned to see a figure stepping out from the shadows. A man in a lab coat, his face pale but determined. It was Dr. Patel, a scientist who had been part of their team for years. His presence was a shock. They had assumed he was lost when the facility went dark, but as he stepped closer, his eyes told a different story. They were haunted, filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Don't shoot him," Dr. Patel said, his voice trembling but firm. "He's not the enemy, not entirely." Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. "Patel. What are you talking about? What's happening here?" Patel's gaze shifted to Daniels, who stood frozen, his expression unreadable. "They've been here for decades," Patel said, his words heavy with the weight of revelation. "The aliens, they're not just invaders, they're architects. They've been manipulating us, shaping our technology, our society, even our thoughts, and Daniels, he's one of them." But he's not the only one. The room fell silent, the implications of Patel's words sinking in. Dr. Carter's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The sleeper agents, the hidden markers, the alien technology embedded in their systems. It all pointed to a plan far more insidious than any of them had imagined. "How long?" Holt demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "How long have they been here?" Patel hesitated, his eyes darting to the ceiling as if expecting something to happen. "At least 50 years, he said finally. "Maybe more. They've been planting seeds, infiltrating key positions, ensuring that when the time came, humanity would be too fractured to fight back. And now the time has come." Before anyone could respond, a low, whirring sound filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Patel's eyes widened, and he stepped back, his voice urgent. "They're here, they've been watching us, listening. If they think I've said too much..." The sentence was cut short as a sleek, metallic drone descended from the shadows above, its surface glinting in the dim light. It moved with terrifying speed, its movements fluid and precise. Before anyone could react, a beam of light shot from the drone, striking Patel in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, his body convulsing as the light enveloped him. "Patel!" Dr. Carter shouted, rushing forward, but Holt grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Stay back," he barked, his eyes fixed on the drone as it hovered menacingly above Patel's lifeless body. The team scrambled for cover, their weapons trained on the drone, but it didn't attack again. Instead, it simply hovered for a moment, as if assessing the situation, before ascending back into the shadows and disappearing as quickly as it had come. The room was silent once more, the weight of Patel's final words hanging in the air. The aliens weren't just invaders. They were puppeteers, pulling strings they had spent decades weaving into the fabric of human society. And now, with Patel gone, the team was left with more questions than answers. Dr. Carter knelt beside Patel's body, her hands trembling as she searched for any sign of life. But he was gone, his final warnings echoing in her mind. The invasion wasn't just happening around them, it was happening through them, and if they didn't find a way to unravel the web of control the aliens had built, humanity wouldn't just lose the war. It would lose itself. The team stood in stunned silence, the reality of their situation sinking in. The aliens weren't just enemies, they were shadows lurking in the corners of their world, in the minds of their friends, in the very systems they relied on. And now the shadows were closing in. The team moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the cold, alien-infested facility as they retraced their path toward the exit. Dr. Carter clutched the data drive they had recovered from Patel's workstation, its small, metallic surface warm against her palm. The drive contained everything: coordinates, schematics, and encrypted files detailing the aliens' infiltration and their plans for humanity. It was their only hope, and they couldn't afford to lose it. The exit loomed ahead, a faint sliver of moonlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. As they burst through the doors, the cold night air hit them like a shock, sharp and biting. The armored vehicle was still parked where they had left it, its silhouette stark against the barren landscape. Holt was the first to reach it, yanking open the driver's door and sliding behind the wheel. "Get in," he barked, his voice tense with urgency. The team piled into the vehicle, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Dr. Carter handed the data drive to Liam, who immediately plugged it into the onboard computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, lines of code and encrypted files scrolling rapidly. "We've got it," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "Now let's get the hell out of here." But as Holt turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, his frustration mounting, but the vehicle remained silent. "What the hell is going on?" he growled, slamming his fist against the steering wheel. Dr. Carter's stomach sank as she glanced at the dashboard. The power indicator was dead, the entire system unresponsive. "They've sabotaged it," she said, her voice tight. "The aliens, they must have disabled it while we were inside." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. The facility was no longer safe, and now their only means of escape was gone. Outside, the landscape stretched endlessly, a desolate expanse of cracked earth and jagged rock formations. Alien structures loomed in the distance, their organic shapes glowing faintly against the night sky. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as though the world itself were holding its breath. "We're on foot," Holt said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Stick together, stay alert, and keep that data safe. It's our only chance." The team moved quickly, their footsteps crunching against the dry, brittle ground. The alien structures grew closer with every step, their surfaces shimmering with an otherworldly light. Dr. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see figures emerging from the shadows, but the landscape remained eerily still. As they passed one of the alien structures, Dr. Carter paused, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. The structure was unlike anything humanity had ever built, its surface smooth and fluid, as though it were alive. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the material, and a faint hum vibrated through her hand. It's not just a building," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a machine, a living machine." Liam's eyes widened. "You mean it's sentient?" "Maybe," Dr. Carter replied, her mind racing. "Or maybe it's part of something larger. A network. If we can figure out how it works, we might be able to disrupt it." But before she could explore further, a low, guttural growl echoed through the air, sending a shiver down her spine. The team froze, their weapons raised, as a shadowy figure emerged from behind the structure. It was humanoid, but its movements were unnaturally fluid, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "Run," Holt said, his voice low but urgent. The team didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted across the desolate landscape, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as the alien structures loomed larger with every step. The data drive was their lifeline, but the world around them was alive with danger, every shadow a potential threat. As they crested a hill, the lights of a distant outpost came into view, a small, human settlement that had somehow escaped the aliens' notice. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. The growl behind them grew louder, closer, and they knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The invasion wasn't just out there. It was all around them, and the fight for survival had only just begun. The outpost loomed ahead, its flickering lights a beacon of hope in the desolate wasteland. The team moved cautiously, their exhaustion outweighed by the adrenaline coursing through their veins. As they approached the perimeter, a figure stepped out from the shadows. A woman with wild, unkempt hair and a makeshift weapon slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were wide, darting nervously between the team and the darkness beyond. "Stop right there," she called, her voice trembling but firm. "Who are you and what do you want?" Holt raised his hands slowly, his weapon lowered but still within reach. "We're not here to hurt you, we're survivors just like you. We need shelter and we need answers." The woman hesitated, her gaze lingering on Dr. Carter, who stepped forward with a calm, steady presence. "We've been fighting them too," Dr. Carter said softly. "We've seen what they can do. If you've been here long, you know more than most. Please help us." For a moment, the woman said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then, with a reluctant nod, she motioned for them to follow. Inside, quickly, they're always watching. The outpost was a chaotic blend of salvaged materials and alien tech, its walls lined with makeshift barricades and glowing alien devices repurposed for human use. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of countless stories untold. As they entered the main chamber, a group of survivors turned to face them, their faces gaunt but hardened by survival. One man stepped forward, his arm wrapped in bandages stained with a strange, iridescent fluid. His voice was rough, his words measured. "You've seen them, haven't you?" "The hybrids," Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. "Hybrids, what do you mean?" The man exchanged a glance with the woman who had brought them in, then gestured for them to sit. "We were abducted," he began, his tone heavy with the weight of memory. "Taken from our homes, our families. They experimented on us, took our DNA, mixed it with theirs. They're trying to create soldiers, hybrid soldiers, part human, part alien, faster, stronger, and completely under their control." The room fell silent, the implications of his words sinking in. Dr. Carter's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what they had seen: the stasis pods, the organic machinery, the alien human figures. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. The aliens weren't just invading, they were evolving, using humanity as a resource to create something even more dangerous. "You survived," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How?" The man's expression darkened. "Not all of us did. Those who resisted, they were disposed of. The rest of us were kept alive, used as test subjects. They'd inject us with something, some kind of serum. It changed us, made us stronger, but it messed with our heads, made us hear their voices, see their visions. Some of us broke free, but not all." Dr. Carter leaned forward, her scientific curiosity piqued despite the horror of the situation. "Do you still have any of the serum? Any of the equipment they used?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "We managed to steal some when we escaped, but it's dangerous. Whatever's in it, it's not just physical. It gets inside your mind, changes you, makes you one of them." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The hybrids weren't just a threat, they were a warning. A glimpse of what could happen if the aliens succeeded in their plan. Humanity wouldn't just be conquered, it would be transformed, repurposed into something unrecognizable. Holt broke the silence, his voice sharp with determination. We need to see it, the serum, the equipment, everything. If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can stop them before it's too late. The survivors hesitated, their faces etched with fear and mistrust, but the woman who had brought them in stepped forward, her voice steady. If they're willing to fight, we should let them. We've been hiding long enough. It's time to fight back. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, the survivors' fear slowly giving way to a flicker of hope. As Dr. Carter stood, her resolve hardened. The hybrids were a terrifying glimpse into the aliens' endgame, but they were also a clue, a way to understand the enemy and perhaps to stop them. The fight for humanity's survival had just taken a darker turn, but it was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. The survivors led Dr. Carter and her team to a cramped, makeshift lab tucked away in the corner of the outpost. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with salvaged alien tech, human medical supplies, and a few crude devices cobbled together from both. At the center of the room sat a small workstation, its surface covered in notes, diagrams, and a single vial of glowing, iridescent liquid, the serum. Dr. Carter's eyes immediately locked onto the vial, her scientific instincts kicking into overdrive. She picked it up carefully, holding it to the light. The liquid inside shifted and pulsed, almost as if it were alive. "This is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with both awe and apprehension. The man with the bandaged arm nodded grimly. "That's what they used on us. It changes you, makes you stronger, faster, but it makes you hear them, their voices, their thoughts. It's like they are inside your head." Dr. Carter set the vial down, her mind racing. If the serum was designed to integrate human biology with alien technology, it might hold the key to understanding how the aliens operated, and more importantly, how to stop them. She turned to Liam, who was already setting up his equipment. "I need a full analysis of this, chemical composition, biological markers, everything. If we can figure out how it works, we might be able to reverse engineer it." As Liam got to work, Dr. Carter turned her attention to the rest of the lab. Among the chaos, one device stood out, a small, alien-built emitter, its surface etched with the same intricate patterns they had seen before. She picked it up, her fingers brushing over the grooves. "What does this do?" she asked, holding it up for the survivors to see. The woman who had brought them in stepped forward, her expression darkening. "We're not sure. We found it in one of their structures. It makes a sound, a low hum, almost like a vibration. It's not loud, but it's unsettling, like it's trying to communicate." Dr. Carter's eyes widened as a realization struck her. She quickly connected the emitter to a portable power source, her hands trembling with anticipation. When she activated it, the room filled with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls and into their bones. But something else happened, something unexpected. On the workstation, the vial of serum began to react. The liquid inside quivered, its glow flickering and dimming as the hum grew louder. Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. "It's disrupting the serum," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The frequency, it's destabilizing the alien biology." The implications were staggering. If the aliens' technology, and by extension their biology, was vulnerable to a specific frequency of sound, it could be their Achilles heel, a weakness they could exploit. Holt stepped forward, his expression intense. "Can we weaponize this, use it against them?" Dr. Carter nodded, her mind already racing through the possibilities. "Yes, but we'd need more sophisticated equipment, something capable of generating and amplifying the frequency on a larger scale. There's a military base about 20 miles from here, Fort Carson. If we can get there, we can access the tech we need to make this work. The room fell silent as the weight of the plan settled over them. The journey would be dangerous, with alien patrols and hybrid soldiers likely standing in their way. But the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. The man with the bandaged arm stepped forward, his voice steady. "We'll help you get there. Some of us know the terrain, and we've got vehicles that can handle the journey. But once you're inside that base, you're on your own." Dr. Carter met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "Thank you. We'll make sure your bravery isn't in vain." As the team prepared to leave, the hum of the emitter still resonated in the air, a faint reminder of the hope they now carried. The aliens were powerful, but they weren't invincible. And if Dr. Carter and her team could reach Fort Carson, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. The fight for humanity's survival had entered a new phase, and the stakes had never been higher. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a weapon, and they weren't going to waste it. The journey to Fort Carson began under the cover of darkness, the team's vehicle weaving through the desolate remains of what was once a bustling city. The ruins loomed around them like skeletal giants, their jagged outlines silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of danger. Dr. Carter clutched the emitter tightly, its faint hum a constant reminder of their fragile hope. They were halfway through the city when the first sign of trouble appeared, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound, like metal tapping against stone. Holt, seated in the driver's seat, stiffened, his eyes scanning the ruins. "Stay sharp," he muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The clicking grew louder, more insistent, and then they saw them. Alien scouts, their sleek, angular forms darting between the ruins with terrifying speed. Their glowing eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto the vehicle with predatory precision. "They've found us," Liam said, his voice tight with fear. Holt slammed the accelerator, the vehicle lurching forward as the scouts gave chase. The ruined city became a blur of crumbling buildings and shattered streets, the team clinging to their seats as Holt swerved to avoid debris. The scouts were relentless, their movements unnervingly precise, closing the distance with alarming speed. "We can't outrun them," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to lose them in the ruins." Holt nodded, his jaw set in grim determination. He veered sharply, the vehicle skidding into a narrow alleyway barely wide enough to fit. The scouts followed, their forms twisting and contorting to navigate the tight space. The team's hearts pounded as the alleyway opened into a large, open plaza, a dead end. Holt slammed on the brakes, the vehicle skidding to a halt. "Out now," he barked, throwing open his door and leaping out. The team scrambled to follow, their feet hitting the cracked pavement as the scouts closed in. Holt turned to them, his expression fierce but calm. "Take the emitter and go, I'll hold them off." Dr. Carter's heart lurched. "Holt, no, we're not leaving you." He shook his head, his voice firm. "This isn't up for debate. You've got the emitter, you've got the plan, I'll buy you time." Before anyone could argue, he turned and raised his weapon, firing a burst of rounds at the approaching scouts. The shots echoed through the plaza, the scouts recoiling but not retreating. Holt stood his ground, his figure silhouetted against the glow of their eyes. The team hesitated, torn between their instinct to fight and the cold logic of survival. Dr. Carter's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's move." They fled through the ruins, the sounds of Holt's battle fading into the distance. Each step felt like a betrayal, but they knew he was right. This was their only chance. As they reached the edge of the city, a deafening explosion shook the ground, the shockwave rippling through the air. They turned, their hearts sinking as a plume of smoke rose into the night sky. Holt was gone, the weight of his sacrifice settled over them, a heavy, unspoken grief, but even in their devastation, they knew they couldn't stop. Holt had given them a chance, and they couldn't waste it. Dr. Carter tightened her grip on the emitter, her resolve hardening. The road to Fort Carson stretched ahead, dark and uncertain. The aliens were relentless, their scouts a constant threat. But the team pressed on, driven by a newfound determination. Holt's sacrifice wasn't just a loss, it was a reminder of what was at stake. The fight wasn't over. And as long as they had the emitter, they still had a chance. The team approached Fort Carson with a mixture of hope and dread, the military base's imposing gates looming ahead in the pre-dawn darkness. The air was eerily still, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their boots, but as they drew closer, the signs of devastation became impossible to ignore. The once impenetrable walls were breached, their steel frames twisted and scorched. The ground was littered with debris-shattered vehicles, torn uniforms, and the faint, iridescent residue of alien technology. Dr. Carter's heart sank as she surveyed the scene. "They've already been here," she said, her voice tight with dismay. Liam stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Do you think there's anyone left?" Before anyone could answer, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. The team froze, their weapons raised, as a figure emerged. A hybrid soldier, its human features distorted by the alien modifications. Its glowing eyes locked onto them, and it charged with terrifying speed. Holt's sacrifice had bought them time, but they were far from safe. The team scattered, their training kicking in as they returned fire. The hybrid staggered under the barrage but didn't fall, its resilience a chilling reminder of the aliens' advancements. Dr. Carter's mind raced as she dodged its attacks, her thoughts focused on the emitter clutched tightly in her hands. They couldn't afford to waste time here. They had to reach the communications tower. "Cover me," she shouted, darting past the hybrid and toward the base's interior. The others followed, their movements coordinated but desperate. The base was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each one a potential ambush point. Alien structures had sprouted from the walls and floors, their organic shapes pulsating faintly as if alive. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal, and something else, something sickly sweet and unnatural. As they pressed deeper into the base, the frequency of encounters increased. Hybrid soldiers lurked around every corner, their movements unnervingly precise. The team fought valiantly, but their ammunition was running low and their energy was fading. Dr. Carter's determination never wavered, though. The emitter was their only hope, and she couldn't let anything or anyone stand in their way. Finally, they reached the communications tower, a towering structure that loomed over the base. But their relief was short-lived. The entrance was guarded by a massive alien construct, its surface rippling with energy. It was unlike anything they had encountered before, a sentient machine, pulsing with malevolent intelligence. "We need to get past that," Liam said, his voice trembling. Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed as she studied the construct. "The emitter, it disrupts their biology. Maybe it can disrupt their machines too." Without hesitation, she activated the emitter, its hum resonating through the air. The construct reacted immediately, its surface rippling violently as the frequency destabilized its systems. With a deafening crack, it collapsed in on itself, its energy dissipating into the air. The team didn't waste a moment. They rushed into the tower, their exhaustion forgotten as they ascended the stairs to the control room. The equipment was still intact, a testament to the base's last stand. Dr. Carter quickly connected the emitter to the transmission array, her fingers flying over the controls. "This is our chance," she said, her voice filled with determination. "If we can broadcast the frequency, we can alert the outside world, give them a way to fight back." As the transmission began, a wave of relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from below, the hybrids closing in. The team exchanged grim looks, their resolve hardening. They had come too far to fail now. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they had a real chance. And as the frequency data pulsed out into the world, a spark of hope ignited in the darkness. The control room hummed with energy as Dr. Carter worked feverishly to finalize the transmission. The emitter, now connected to the base's communications array, pulsed with a steady rhythm, its frequency data flowing into the system. The monitors flickered to life, displaying the signal's progress as it traveled through the network. For a brief moment, hope surged through the team. They were so close to alerting the outside world, to giving humanity a fighting chance. But then, the screens glitched. The steady stream of data faltered, the signal dissolving into static. Dr. Carter's hands froze over the controls, her eyes widening in disbelief. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden silence. "They're jamming the signal." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. The aliens weren't just watching. They were actively countering their efforts, their technology far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. The team exchanged grim looks, the weight of the setback pressing down on them. "We can't let them win," Liam said, his voice trembling but resolute. "Not now, not after everything we've been through." Dr. Carter nodded, her mind racing. "The portable device. If we can't transmit from here, we'll have to take the frequency directly to them. We'll use it to disrupt their systems on a smaller scale, but it'll attract their attention, a lot of it. The portable emitter, a smaller version of the one they had used earlier, was their last resort. It was powerful enough to disrupt alien tech within a limited radius, but broadcasting the frequency manually would come at a cost. The aliens would detect the signal immediately, and they wouldn't hesitate to send everything they had to stop it. The team moved quickly, the urgency of the situation driving them forward. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, their movements sharp and deliberate. Dr. Carter secured the portable emitter to her belt, its faint hum a constant reminder of the danger they were about to face. As they stepped out of the communications tower, the base was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. But the silence didn't last long. The moment Dr. Carter activated the portable emitter, the alien drones appeared, sleek, metallic, and deadly. They descended from the sky in a swarm, their movements synchronized and unnervingly precise. The team took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the approaching drones. The first wave came fast, their glowing eyes locking onto the emitter with predatory focus. The team opened fire, their shots echoing through the ruins of the base. The drones were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, but the team fought with everything they had. Dr. Carter kept the emitter active, its hum growing louder as the frequency disrupted the drone systems. One by one, they faltered, their movements becoming erratic before collapsing to the ground. But for every drone that fell, two more took its place. The battle was chaotic, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire and the hum of the emitter. The team's exhaustion was palpable, their movements slowing as their energy waned, but they couldn't stop. not when the fate of humanity hung in the balance. As the drones closed in, Dr. Carter's mind raced. The portable emitter was their only weapon, but it wasn't enough. They needed a way to amplify the frequency, to send it out on a larger scale. Her eyes landed on the base's power grid, its massive generators still intact. There, she shouted, pointing to the generators, "If we can connect the emitter to the grid, we can amplify the frequency. It'll disrupt their systems across the entire base, maybe even farther." The team didn't hesitate. They fought their way to the generators, their movements fueled by desperation and determination. As Dr. Carter connected the emitter, the hum grew deafening, the air vibrating with energy. The drones faltered, their movements slowing as the frequency overwhelmed their systems. But the victory was short-lived. The amplified frequency had done its job, but it had also attracted something far more dangerous. From the shadows emerged a massive alien construct, its surface rippling with energy and its glowing eyes locked onto the team. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The alien construct loomed over the team, its massive form radiating an almost palpable malevolence. Its surface shimmered with an unnatural energy, and its glowing eyes locked onto the portable emitter in Dr. Carter's hands. The device was their only weapon, their only hope, but it was faltering under the strain of the amplified frequency. Sparks flew from its casing, and the hum that had once been steady now sputtered and crackled. "We're losing it," Dr. Carter shouted, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. The drones, momentarily disrupted by the frequency, were regrouping, their movements jerky but determined. The team was trapped, caught between the advancing drones and the looming construct. Liam, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, stepped forward. "I can fix it," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But I need time." Dr. Carter hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to protect him, but she knew there was no other choice. "Do it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll cover you." The team moved into position, forming a protective circle around Liam as he knelt beside the damaged emitter. His hands moved with practiced precision, his fingers navigating the intricate circuitry despite the tremors of exhaustion. The drones closed in, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness, but the team held their ground. Holt, his rifle steady in his hands, fired a precise burst at an advancing drone, its metallic shell crumpling under the impact. "Keep them back," he barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "We can't let them reach Liam." The battle was chaotic, a blur of motion and sound. The drones came in waves, their numbers seemingly endless, but the team fought with everything they had. Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she reloaded her weapon, her mind racing with the fear of what would happen if they failed. But she pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. They had to buy Liam time no matter the cost. Liam worked feverishly, his fingers flying over the emitter's damaged components. The device was a tangled mess of wires and circuits, its inner workings alien even to him. But he didn't let that stop him. He had studied its design during their journey, memorizing every detail, and now that knowledge was their only hope. A drone broke through the defensive line, its metallic claws slashing toward Liam. Dr. Carter reacted instinctively, lunging forward and tackling the drone to the ground. The impact jarred her, but she didn't falter. She drove her knife into the drone's glowing core, its light flickering and dying as it collapsed. "Liam, how much longer?" She shouted, her voice strained with exertion. "Almost there," he replied, his tone tight with concentration. He connected the final wire, the emitter's hum returning to its steady rhythm. Got it. The team didn't waste a moment. Dr. Carter grabbed the emitter, its renewed energy radiating through her hands. She aimed it at the advancing drones, the frequency pulsing through the air. The drones faltered, their movements becoming erratic as the frequency overwhelmed their systems. One by one, they collapsed, their metallic shells crumpling to the ground. But the victory was short-lived. The alien construct, its surface rippling with energy, stepped forward, its glowing eyes locking onto the team. The battle wasn't over, it had only just begun. The team braced themselves, their weapons raised and their resolve unshaken. They had come too far to fail now. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The emitter's renewed hum surged through the air, its frequency resonating with a clarity that sent the remaining drones into a chaotic frenzy. Their once precise movements faltered, their glowing eyes flickering as the signal disrupted their systems. One by one, they crumpled to the ground, their metallic shells sparking and hissing as they fell. For a moment, the team allowed themselves to breathe, their chests heaving with exertion and relief. They had done it, they had turned the tide, even if only temporarily, but the victory was fleeting. As the last drone collapsed, a low, rumbling sound began to echo through the air, growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the team turned their gaze toward the horizon. What they saw sent a chill down their spines. Emerging from the darkness was a massive alien warship, its silhouette cutting through the pale light of the rising sun. The ship was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Its surface was sleek and organic, its edges blurred as though it were part of the sky itself. It moved with a terrifying grace, its sheer size dwarfing the ruins of Fort Carson and casting an ominous shadow over the landscape. Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. "That's not just a ship," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a command center, the invasion force. This is it, the main assault." The team stood frozen, their earlier triumph replaced by a crushing sense of dread. The drones had been a test, a preliminary wave meant to weaken their defenses. This warship, with its overwhelming presence, signaled the true beginning of the invasion. Its arrival was a declaration. Humanity's resistance was futile. Liam, his hands still trembling from the effort of repairing the emitter, turned to Dr. Carter. "What do we do now? We can't fight something like that." Dr. Carter's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of desperation and determination. The emitter had worked on the drones, but against a warship of that magnitude, it was a drop in the ocean. They needed something bigger, something capable of amplifying the frequency on a global scale. Her eyes landed on the base's satellite array, its massive dish still intact despite the destruction around it. "The satellite," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "If we can link the emitter to the array, we can broadcast the frequency worldwide. It won't stop the warship, but it might disrupt their systems long enough for us to regroup." The team moved quickly, their exhaustion overshadowed by the urgency of the situation. The satellite array loomed ahead, its towering structure a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. But as they approached, the warship's presence grew more oppressive, its shadow darkening the ground beneath them. Holt, his rifle slung over his shoulder, turned to Dr. Carter. "Even if we pull this off, it's not going to be enough. That thing," he gestured toward the warship, "it's not just a ship. It's a fortress. We need a plan, not just a distraction." Dr. Carter nodded, her jaw set in grim determination. "You're right, but this is a start. If we can disrupt their systems, we buy ourselves time to figure out how to fight back." Time to warn the world. As they reached the base of the satellite array, the warship began to descend, its massive form blotting out the sky. The team worked frantically, connecting the emitter to the array's control panel. The hum of the frequency grew louder, resonating through the air like a battle cry. The warship's response was immediate. Its surface rippled, its organic material shifting as though reacting to the signal. The team watched in awe as the frequency began to take effect, the warship's movements slowing, its glowing lights flickering, but the victory was short-lived. The warship's surface pulsed, a wave of energy emanating from its core and neutralizing the frequency. The hum of the emitter faltered, its signal overwhelmed by the sheer power of the alien technology. The team stared in stunned silence as the warship resumed its descent, its shadow swallowing the base. The fight wasn't over, but the odds had never been greater. The invasion had begun in earnest, and humanity's survival now hung by the thinnest of threads. Dr. Carter's eyes widened as the warship's trajectory became clear. Its massive form was no longer just descending, it was moving, gliding with an almost predatory grace toward the horizon. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the skyline in the distance. "It's heading for New Haven," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "That's one of the most densely populated cities on the continent. If it reaches there," she didn't need to finish the sentence. The team knew what it meant. The warship wasn't just a symbol of the invasion, it was a weapon, and its target was millions of innocent lives. The satellite array had bought them a few precious moments, but now they needed to act fast. "We have to warn them," Liam said, his voice trembling but resolute. "If we can get a message out, maybe we can evacuate the city, buy people time to get out." Dr. Carter nodded, her mind already racing through the possibilities. "The emergency broadcast system, we can override it, send out a mass alert, but we'll need access to the central comms hub." The team moved quickly, their exhaustion overshadowed by the adrenaline of the moment. They commandeered one of the base's remaining vehicles, its engine sputtering to life as they sped toward the city. The roads were eerily empty, the aftermath of the invasion leaving the landscape desolate and silent. But as they approached the outskirts of New Haven, the signs of life began to appear. Cars abandoned in the middle of the road, panicked crowds fleeing in every direction, and the distant wail of sirens. When they reached the city's emergency operations center, the scene was chaotic. The building was swarming with officials and first responders, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Dr. Carter pushed through the crowd, her credentials as a leading scientist giving her just enough authority to demand access to the control room. Inside, the tension was palpable. Monitors displayed live footage of the warship's approach, its shadow looming ever closer. A man in a crisp suit stood at the center of the room, his posture commanding and his voice sharp as he barked orders to the staff. He turned as Dr. Carter entered, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Carter," he said, his tone calm but with an edge that sent a chill down her spine, "I've been expecting you." She froze, her instincts screaming at her that something was wrong. The man's face was familiar, too familiar. He was Senator Jameson, one of the most influential figures in the government, a man who had been at the forefront of the response to the invasion. But as she studied him, she noticed the faintest flicker in his eyes, a subtle, unnatural glow that sent a wave of dread through her. "You're one of them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jameson smiled, a cold, mechanical smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're sharper than I expected," he said, his voice layered with an alien resonance. "But you're too late. The integration is complete, the city will fall, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The room erupted into chaos as Jameson's true nature was revealed. Staff members scrambled for cover, their fear palpable, but Dr. Carter stood her ground. "We're not too late," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We've faced worse than you." Jameson's smile widened, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. The team moved quickly, their training kicking in as they worked to neutralize the sleeper agent. But Jameson was no ordinary foe. His alien enhancements made him faster, stronger, and far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. The control room became a battlefield, the monitors shattering as the fight raged on. Dr. Carter's mind raced as she dodged Jameson's attacks. They needed to warn the city, but with the sleeper agent standing in their way, their options were dwindling. She glanced at the control panel, her eyes landing on the emergency broadcast switch. It was their only chance. "Liam," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The broadcast now. Liam didn't hesitate. He lunged for the control panel, his fingers flying over the switches as Jameson turned to stop him. But Dr. Carter was faster. She tackled the sleeper agent, her momentum sending them both crashing to the ground. The hum of the emergency broadcast filled the air, the signal pulsing out to every screen, every radio, every device in the city. The message was simple but urgent. "Evacuate immediately, the invasion is here." Jameson's glowing eyes narrowed as he realized what had happened. "You've only delayed the inevitable," he said, his voice cold and final. But as the team fought to hold their ground, Dr. Carter knew they had done more than that. They had given the city a chance, a slim, desperate chance. And in the face of overwhelming odds, that was enough. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, the people of New Haven had hope, and hope, she knew, was a powerful weapon. The control room was a battlefield of chaos, shattered glass and sparks raining down as the team struggled to subdue Jameson. His alien-enhanced strength was formidable, but Dr. Carter and her team fought with a desperation born of necessity. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, Jameson's mechanical smile widened unnaturally, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You think this is about survival?" he hissed, his voice layered with that unnerving alien resonance. "This is about evolution. Your leaders saw the future, our future, and they chose to embrace it. The government didn't fight the invasion, they facilitated it. Human lives for alien technology. A fair trade, wouldn't you say?" The words hit Dr. Carter like a punch to the gut. She froze, her mind reeling as the implications sank in. The sleeper agents, the sudden collapses of key defenses, the inexplicable failures of their most secure systems. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. The invasion wasn't just an external force. It had been enabled from within by those who were supposed to protect humanity. Before she could respond, the doors to the control room burst open, a squad of heavily armed soldiers storming in. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movements were too precise, their eyes too cold. Dr. Carter's heart sank as she recognized the faint glow beneath their helmets. Hybrids, human-alien hybrids, under the control of the invaders. The team fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. The hybrids moved with terrifying speed and coordination, their weapons trained on the team with lethal precision. One by one, they were subdued, their hands bound and their weapons confiscated. Dr. Carter struggled against the restraints, her mind racing with a mixture of anger and fear. As the hybrids led them out of the building, the city outside was in chaos. The warship loomed overhead, its shadow casting an ominous pall over the streets. People screamed and ran in every direction, but the hybrids moved with a singular purpose, herding the team into a sleek, black transport vehicle. The interior of the vehicle was cold and sterile, the air thick with the faint hum of alien technology. Dr. Carter exchanged a glance with Liam and Holt, their faces pale but resolute. They had been captured, but they weren't defeated, not yet. The ride was silent, the tension palpable. The hybrids sat motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on the team with an unnerving intensity. Dr. Carter's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what Jameson had revealed. The government's complicity, the trade of human lives for alien tech. It was a betrayal on an unimaginable scale, but it also meant that the aliens weren't invincible. If humanity's leaders had struck a deal, there had to be a reason, a weakness, a vulnerability, something they could exploit. The vehicle came to a halt, the doors sliding open to reveal a massive, underground facility. The walls were lined with alien technology, their surfaces pulsing faintly with an otherworldly light. The team was led through a maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing in the sterile silence. Finally, they were brought to a large, circular chamber, its center dominated by a towering alien construct. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, something sickly sweet and unnatural. Standing at the center of the room was a figure, their back turned to the team. As the figure turned, Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. It was someone she recognized, a high-ranking official, someone she had once trusted. Their eyes glowed faintly, their expression cold and unreadable. "Welcome," the figure said, their voice layered with that same alien resonance. "You've come a long way to see the truth. But now you'll see it from the inside." The team exchanged grim looks, their resolve hardening. They had been captured, but they weren't broken. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over, and they would find a way to turn the tide no matter the cost. The chamber was cold, the air thick with the hum of alien machinery and the faint, metallic scent of ozone. The towering alien construct at the center pulsed with an eerie light, its surface rippling as though alive. Dr. Carter stood with her team, their hands bound but their spirits unbroken. The figure before them, a high-ranking official whose face she once trusted, turned slowly, their glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You've seen the truth," the sleeper agent said, their voice layered with that unnatural resonance. "Humanity's leaders made a choice. They saw the future and understood the inevitability of our integration. Resistance is futile, but you have a choice." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dr. Carter's jaw tightened, her mind racing. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified everything. The sudden collapses of defenses, the inexplicable failures of their most secure systems, it wasn't just incompetence or bad luck. It was deliberate. The aliens hadn't just invaded, they had been invited. The sleeper agent stepped closer, their movements unnervingly precise. "Join us," they said, their tone almost coaxing. "Embrace the evolution. You've seen what we can do, what we can offer. Strength, unity, a future without the chaos and division that has plagued your species for millennia." Or, they paused, their glowing eyes narrowing. "You can choose extermination. The choice is yours." The room fell silent, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down on them. Dr. Carter glanced at her team, their faces pale but resolute. She knew what they were thinking. The aliens had infiltrated their world, their governments, their very leadership. The odds were overwhelming, the stakes unimaginable. But giving up wasn't an option. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "You think we'll just roll over and accept this? You think we'll abandon everything we are?" everything we've fought for, because you've dangled some shiny promise of a better future." Her tone sharpened, her defiance cutting through the sterile air. "We're not yours to control, not now, not ever." The sleeper agent's smile faltered, their glowing eyes flickering with something akin to irritation. "Defiance is pointless," they said, their voice colder now. "You're outnumbered, outmatched, your resistance only delays the inevitable." But Dr. Carter wasn't finished. She turned to the other captives in the room, men and women who had been rounded up, their faces filled with fear and confusion. "Do you hear that?" she said, her voice rising. "They want us to believe we're powerless, that we have no choice, but we do, we always have, we can fight, we can resist together." Her words sparked something, a flicker of hope, a surge of defiance. The captives, who had been silent and subdued, began to stir. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, growing louder with each passing second. The sleeper agent's expression darkened, their glowing eyes narrowing as they realized what was happening. "Silence," they barked, their voice echoing unnaturally. But it was too late. The spark of rebellion had been lit. One of the captives, a burly man with a gash across his forehead, stepped forward. "She's right," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "We're not going down without a fight." Another voice joined his, then another, until the room was filled with the sound of defiance. The sleeper agent backed away, their confidence wavering as the tide turned against them. Dr. Carter's heart pounded as she turned to her team. "Let's go," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've got a world to save." The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. But for the first time, they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for humanity's future, and they weren't going to let anyone or anything take that away from them. The room erupted into chaos as the captives, emboldened by Dr. Carter's defiance, turned on their captors. The sleeper agent's cold confidence shattered as the once subdued crowd surged forward, their fear replaced by a desperate, collective rage. Dr. Carter seized the moment, her eyes darting to the alien construct at the center of the chamber. Its pulsing light seemed to flicker in response to the growing unrest, as if the machine itself sensed the shift in power. "Liam," she shouted over the din, her voice sharp with urgency. "The construct, it's the key. If we can disrupt it, we might be able to take control of the facility's systems." Liam nodded, his face pale but determined. Together they fought their way through the chaos, their movements fueled by adrenaline and necessity. The hybrids, caught off guard by the sudden revolt, struggled to regain control, their glowing eyes flickering with confusion. As they reached the base of the construct, Dr. Carter's hands flew over its surface, searching for a way to access its core. The alien technology was unlike anything she had ever encountered, its surface smooth and cold, its patterns shifting under her touch as if alive. But she didn't let that deter her. Years of training and instinct guided her as she worked, her mind racing through the possibilities. "There," she said, her voice tinged with triumph as she located a panel that seemed to pulse faintly. She pried it open, revealing a tangle of glowing wires and circuits. "If we can reroute the energy flow, we might be able to destabilize the construct's core." Liam knelt beside her, his hands trembling but steady as he worked to reroute the wires. The hum of the construct grew louder, its light intensifying as the energy within it began to destabilize. But the hybrids were closing in, their movements sharp and predatory as they realized what was happening. "Cover them," Holt barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. He and the other captives formed a defensive line, their makeshift weapons raised as they fought to hold back the advancing hybrids. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the clash of bodies, the room a whirlwind of motion and noise. Dr. Carter's fingers moved with practiced precision, her focus unwavering despite the chaos around her. Almost there, she muttered, her voice tight with concentration. Just one more, the construct's hum reached a deafening crescendo, its light flaring so brightly that it blinded everyone in the room. Then, with a deafening crack, the construct collapsed in on itself, its energy dissipating into the air. The facility's systems faltered, the lights flickering and the hum of alien machinery fading into silence. For a moment, the room was still, the hybrids frozen in place as their connection to the alien network was severed. But the victory was short-lived. The hybrids' glowing eyes flickered, their movements becoming erratic as they struggled to regain control. "Move, Doctor!" Carter shouted, her voice cutting through the silence. The team didn't need to be told twice. They bolted for the nearest exit, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors as the hybrids gave chase. The facility was a maze of twisting hallways and sealed doors, but Dr. Carter's instincts guided them. They moved with purpose, their movements sharp and deliberate as they navigated the labyrinthine structure. But the hybrids were relentless, their inhuman speed and strength closing the gap with terrifying efficiency. As they rounded a corner, Liam spotted a control panel embedded in the wall. "There," he said, his voice urgent. "If we can seal the doors, we might be able to slow them down." Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand against the panel, her fingers flying over the controls. The doors hissed shut just as the hybrids reached them, their snarling faces pressed against the reinforced glass. The team didn't stop to celebrate. They kept moving, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they fought their way toward the surface. The facility was vast, its alien architecture a constant reminder of the threat they faced. But they were closer than ever to freedom, and they weren't going to let anything or anyone stand in their way. As they burst into the open air, the sight that greeted them was both a relief and a grim reminder of the fight ahead. The warship loomed overhead, its shadow casting an ominous pall over the landscape. But for the first time, they had a chance. They had fought back, and they had won. The escape wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. And as the team disappeared into the night, the hybrid snarls fading into the distance, they knew one thing for certain: the fight for humanity's survival was far from over. The team moved swiftly through the dark, twisting corridors of the alien facility, their breaths ragged and their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the faint, sickly sweet scent of the alien technology that permeated every inch of the structure. The construct's collapse had bought them precious time, but the hybrids were still out there, and the warship loomed ominously overhead, its shadow a constant reminder of the stakes. As they rounded a corner, Liam stumbled, his face pale and slick with sweat. He clutched his side, his breathing shallow and uneven. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice betrayed the lie. Just keep moving." Dr. Carter slowed her pace, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Liam, what's wrong? You're not fine. Let me see." He hesitated, his hand trembling as he pulled it away from his side. The fabric of his shirt was soaked with blood, but that wasn't what made her heart stop. Beneath the wound, his skin was discolored, a network of faint, glowing veins spreading outward like the roots of a tree. The sight was unmistakable, a sign of alien infection. "Liam," Dr. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper, her mind racing with the implications. "When did this happen?" He avoided her gaze, his expression a mixture of guilt and fear. Back in the facility, one of the hybrids, it got me. I thought I could fight it off, but his voice broke, the words trailing off as he leaned heavily against the wall. The team gathered around him, their faces pale with shock and dread. Holt's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, his voice sharp with urgency. "We need to move. If they've infected him, they'll be tracking us. We can't stay here." But Dr. Carter didn't move. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what she knew about the alien infection. The glowing veins, the rapid deterioration, it wasn't just a physical transformation. The parasite was rewriting Liam's biology, turning him into one of them. And once the process was complete, he wouldn't be Liam anymore. "Liam," she said, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken sorrow, "we need to contain this. If the parasite spreads, it could infect the rest of us, or worse, give the aliens a way to track us down." He nodded weakly, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I know, I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't know how long I can fight it." The weight of the situation pressed down on the team, their resolve tested like never before. Holt stepped forward, his expression grim. "There's no easy way to say this, but we can't risk it. If he turns, he'll put us all in danger. We need to." He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Dr. Carter's heart ached as she looked at Liam, her friend and colleague, now a ticking time bomb. The idea of leaving him behind, or worse, was unthinkable. But the stakes were too high to ignore. "Wait," she said, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside her. "There might be another way. If we can isolate him, keep him stable, we might be able to find a way to reverse the infection. We've seen what their technology can do. Maybe we can use it against them." Holt's eyes narrowed, his skepticism evident. "And if we can't, if he turns before we find a solution, then we'll deal with it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But we're not abandoning him, not yet." The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. But no one argued. They knew what was at stake, but they also knew they couldn't leave one of their own behind. As they moved forward, Liam leaning heavily on Dr. Carter for support, the tension in the air was palpable. The infection was spreading, and time was running out, but they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other. The escape had taken a dark turn, but the team's resolve remained unshaken. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would face them again. The fight for humanity's survival wasn't just about defeating the aliens. It was about holding on to what made them human, and that was a fight they weren't willing to lose. The corridor was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the facility's failing systems and the ragged breaths of the team as they moved forward. Liam's condition was worsening by the minute, the glowing veins spreading further across his skin, his steps growing more unsteady. He leaned heavily on Dr. Carter, his weight a constant reminder of the ticking clock. The hybrids were closing in, their snarls echoing faintly in the distance, and the team knew they couldn't keep this pace for much longer. "Listen," Liam said suddenly, his voice weak but firm. He stopped, pulling away from Dr. Carter's support and leaning against the wall. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I can't keep up, and if I slow you down, none of us are getting out of here." Dr. Carter shook her head, her voice sharp with desperation. "We're not leaving you, Liam. Not like this. We'll figure something out." "No," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You need to get to the resistance base, warn them about what's coming. If I stay behind, I can buy you time, I can hold them off." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what he was suggesting. Holt stepped forward, his expression grim. "Liam, you don't have to do this. We can find another way." But Liam shook his head, his jaw set in determination. "This is the way. If I'm going to turn, I'd rather it mean something. Let me do this for all of us." The team hesitated, their hearts heavy with the unspoken truth of his words. They had fought together, survived together, and the idea of leaving him behind was unthinkable. But the hybrids were closing in, their snarls growing louder with each passing second. They were out of time. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, the words thick with emotion. "We won't forget this. We won't forget you." Liam managed a weak smile, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "Go, and don't look back." The team moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridor as they left Liam behind. He turned to face the approaching hybrids, his body trembling but his resolve unshaken. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them, sharp and sporadic, each shot a reminder of the sacrifice he was making. As they reached the end of the corridor, the facility's exit loomed ahead, the night sky visible through the shattered doors. The team didn't stop to look back, their movements fueled by a desperate urgency. They had to reach the resistance base. They had to warn the others. The journey through the barren landscape was tense and silent, the weight of Liam's sacrifice pressing down on them. The resistance base was hidden deep in the mountains, a heavily fortified stronghold that had managed to evade the aliens' detection so far. As they approached, the guards recognized them immediately, their weapons lowering as they ushered the team inside. The base was a stark contrast to the sterile, alien-infested facility they had just escaped. It was alive with activity, the air filled with the hum of machinery and the voices of survivors. Maps and schematics covered the walls, their surfaces marked with notes and strategies. This was a place of hope, a place of resistance. Dr. Carter wasted no time. She approached the base's commander, a grizzled woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, and began relaying everything they had learned: the sleeper agents, the alien infection, the warship's trajectory. The commander listened intently, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "We've been preparing for this," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "But we need every advantage we can get. Your intel might just be the key." As the team regrouped, the weight of Liam's sacrifice lingered, a constant reminder of what was at stake. They had lost one of their own, but his bravery had bought them a chance to fight back, to warn the world, and to turn the tide. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun, but as the team prepared for what came next, they carried Liam's memory with them, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over, and they were ready to face whatever came next. The resistance base was a hive of activity, a stark contrast to the desolation that had become the norm outside its walls. The air buzzed with the hum of generators, the clatter of tools, and the low murmur of voices filled with a mixture of determination and cautious hope. As Dr. Carter and her team were ushered deeper into the compound, they were greeted by a diverse group of survivors, their faces etched with the same weariness and resilience that had become all too familiar. These were people who had been fighting in the shadows, holding the line against an enemy most of the world didn't even fully understand. A woman with sharp features and a commanding presence stepped forward, her hand extended in greeting. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, I'm Commander Reyes. We've been waiting for someone like you." Dr. Carter shook her hand, her grip steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her. "Commander, we've been through hell to get here, but we've also learned things that could change everything." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her, the weight of expectation pressing down. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The aliens, they're not invincible. Their technology, their biology, it's all interconnected and it's all vulnerable. We've seen it firsthand. Their systems rely on a specific frequency, a kind of a pulse that keeps everything in sync. If we can disrupt that pulse, we can destabilize them. We've already done it on a small scale. A murmur rippled through the room, the survivors exchanging glances filled with a mix of hope and skepticism. One man, his face scarred and his eyes hard, stepped forward. "You're saying we can fight back with what? A few gadgets and some wishful thinking, Doctor?" Carter met his gaze, her expression steady. "With knowledge, with strategy. We've seen their weaknesses and we've fought them, not just their drones or their hybrids, their infrastructure. Their command centers, they're powerful, but they're not infallible, and if we can hit them where it hurts, we can turn the tide." She turned to the group, her voice rising with conviction. "They've been infiltrating us for years, manipulating our leaders, our systems, even our perceptions, but we're not powerless. We've got something they don't: adaptability. Creativity, the ability to fight for something bigger than ourselves, and that's what we need to use." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, slowly, nods began to spread through the group. The skepticism didn't vanish entirely, but it was tempered by a flicker of hope, a hope that had been absent for far too long. Commander Reyes stepped forward again, her expression thoughtful. "You've given us something to work with," she said, her tone measured, "but we need more than just ideas. We need a plan, and we need to act fast." Dr. Carter nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "We've got data, coordinates, schematics, everything we've gathered so far. If we can analyze it, find patterns, we can identify their key locations, their weak points, and then we hit them where it hurts." The room erupted into activity, the survivors galvanized by the possibility of a real fight. Maps were spread out, data streams analyzed, strategies debated. Dr. Carter found herself at the center of it all, her expertise and first-hand experience making her an invaluable resource. As the night wore on, the mood in the base shifted from cautious hope to determined resolve. The aliens had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't do it again. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their world, their future, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a real chance. The war room of the Resistance base was a flurry of activity, maps and screens covering every available surface. The air was thick with tension, the hum of generators blending with the low murmur of voices as the team analyzed the data Dr. Carter and her team had brought. The alien warship loomed large in their plans, its massive silhouette a constant reminder of the threat they faced, but now they had something they hadn't had before: a weapon. Commander Reyes stood at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "We've got the frequency weapon," she began, her voice cutting through the noise. "But to use it, we need to get it inside the warship. It's the only way to disrupt their systems on a large enough scale to make a difference. The problem is getting it there." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. The warship wasn't just heavily guarded, it was a fortress, its defenses designed to repel any kind of attack. Infiltrating it would be next to impossible, but impossible wasn't an option. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was suggesting. "I've been inside their facilities. I know how their systems work. If anyone has a chance of getting close enough to plant the device, it's me." The room erupted into protests, the survivors' voices overlapping as they argued against the idea. "It's suicide," one man said, his tone sharp with disbelief. "You'll never make it past their defenses." But Dr. Carter held her ground, her gaze unwavering. "It's not just about getting inside," she said, her voice rising over the din. "It's about timing. The weapon needs to be activated at the right moment, when their systems are most vulnerable. I've seen how they operate. I know what to look for." Commander Reyes studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said, her tone measured. "But you're not going in alone. We'll assemble a team, small, fast, and highly trained. They'll get you as close as possible, but once you're inside, you'll be on your own." The plan was risky, but it was the only one they had. The team would use a stolen alien shuttle to approach the warship, its cloaking technology giving them a slim chance of slipping past the defenses undetected. Once inside, Dr. Carter would plant the frequency weapon deep within the ship's core, where it could do the most damage. As the details were finalized, the mood in the room shifted from doubt to determination. The odds were against them, but they had something the aliens didn't: a willingness to risk everything for the chance to fight back. Dr. Carter spent the next few hours preparing, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She knew the risks, but she also knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message. The aliens had underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't do it again. As the team gathered for final briefings, Dr. Carter felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The fear was still there, lingering at the edges of her thoughts, but it was overshadowed by something else: resolve. This was her fight, her chance to make a difference. The shuttle waited on the launch pad, its sleek, alien design a stark contrast to the rugged surroundings of the base. The team climbed aboard, their movements sharp and deliberate, each one acutely aware of the stakes. As the engines roared to life, Dr. Carter took one last look at the base, her thoughts lingering on Liam and the sacrifices they had already made. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about hope, and as the shuttle lifted off, disappearing into the night sky, she knew they were closer than ever to turning the tide. The mission was a gamble, but it was a gamble they had to take. The fight for humanity's survival wasn't just happening on the ground, it was happening in the stars. And Dr. Carter was ready to face it head-on. The stolen alien shuttle hummed softly as it approached the warship, its cloaking technology masking their presence from the enemy's sensors. Inside, the team sat in tense silence, their breaths shallow, their hearts pounding. Dr. Carter gripped the frequency weapon tightly, its faint pulse a constant reminder of the mission's stakes. The warship loomed ahead, its massive form blotting out the stars, a dark monolith of alien power. As they drew closer, the shuttle's systems began to glitch, the cloaking flickering in and out. "We're losing the cloak," Holt muttered, his voice tight with tension. "If they spot us, we're done for." Dr. Carter's mind raced. "There," she said, pointing to a small docking port on the warship's underbelly. "If we can dock there, we might be able to slip in unnoticed." The maneuver was risky, the margin for error razor thin, but they had no other choice. The shuttle slid into the docking port with a soft thud, the team holding their breath as the airlock hissed open. For a moment, everything was still. Then the alarms blared. "They've found us," Liam said, his voice trembling. The team moved quickly, their training kicking in as they spilled out of the shuttle and into the warship's sterile corridors. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something sickly sweet and unnatural. The walls pulsed faintly, their surfaces alive with the same organic patterns they had seen in the facility. The hybrids came fast, their glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. The team fought with everything they had, their weapons flashing in the darkness as they pushed deeper into the ship. But the hybrids weren't the only threat. As they rounded a corner, Dr. Carter froze. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with stasis pods. Inside each one, human captives floated motionlessly, their features eerily serene beneath the murky liquid that encased them. But these weren't ordinary captives. Their bodies were twisted, their forms distorted by grotesque alien modifications. "Oh my God," Liam whispered, his voice filled with horror. Dr. Carter's stomach churned as she approached one of the pods. The captive's face was human, but their limbs were elongated, their skin translucent and glowing faintly. It was as if the aliens had been experimenting, merging human and alien biology to create something new, something monstrous. "We need to keep moving," Holt said, his voice sharp with urgency. "If we don't plant that weapon, this is what's waiting for all of us." But Dr. Carter couldn't tear her eyes away. The experiments were a chilling reminder of the aliens' endgame, not just conquest, but transformation. Humanity wasn't just being invaded, it was being repurposed, its very essence rewritten to serve the invaders. The team pressed on, their resolve hardening with each step. The warship was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and sealed doors, its alien architecture a constant reminder of the threat they faced. But they were closer than ever to the core, and they weren't going to let anything or anyone stand in their way. As they reached the heart of the ship, the air grew colder, the hum of alien machinery growing louder with each passing second. The frequency weapon pulsed faintly in Dr. Carter's hands, its light a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. But as the team prepared to plant the weapon, they knew one thing for certain. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the very soul of humanity. And they weren't going to let the aliens take that away. The warship's core pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic light, its alien architecture both mesmerizing and terrifying. Dr. Carter moved with deliberate precision, her hands steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. The frequency weapon, now activated, hummed faintly in her grasp, its glow intensifying as she secured it to the central console. The device was their last hope, a desperate attempt to disrupt the warship's systems and cripple the alien invasion. But as the weapon locked into place, the room seemed to come alive. The walls rippled, the alien machinery reacting to the intrusion with a surge of energy. A low, guttural alarm echoed through the chamber, its tone shifting from a warning to something far more ominous. The console in front of Dr. Carter flickered, its displays flashing red, as an automated voice, cold and mechanical, began to speak. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Evacuate immediately," it intoned, the words sending a chill through the team. Dr. Carter's heart raced as she turned to the others. "They've triggered a self-destruct. We need to get out of here now." The team didn't need to be told twice. They turned and sprinted back through the twisting corridors, their footsteps echoing in the now chaotic ship. The warship trembled around them, its organic walls shuddering as the self-destruct sequence took hold. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and the air grew thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and alien energy. The hybrids were everywhere now, their movements frantic as they scrambled to contain the damage, but the team was relentless, their determination fueled by the knowledge that every second counted. They fought their way through the onslaught, their weapons flashing in the dim light as they pressed toward the shuttle. As they reached the docking bay, the warship's tremors grew more violent, the structure groaning under the strain. The shuttle was still there, its sleek form a beacon of hope in the chaos. But as the team boarded, a deafening explosion rocked the ship, sending them sprawling. The cores destabilizing, Liam shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We've got to go." Holt took the controls, his hands steady despite the urgency. The shuttle's engines roared to life, its thrusters firing as it shot out of the docking bay and into the void of space. Behind them, the warship began to collapse, its massive form buckling under the weight of its own destruction. The team watched in stunned silence as the warship's core erupted in a blinding flash of light, its energy dissipating into the void. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the shuttle as it hurtled away from the wreckage. For a moment, no one spoke. The enormity of what they had just done hung in the air, a mixture of triumph and disbelief. They had struck a blow against the aliens, but at a cost. The warship was gone, but so were its secrets and any chance of learning more about the invaders' plans. Dr. Carter leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. The mission had succeeded, but the war was far from over. The aliens had been dealt a significant blow, but their reach extended far beyond a single warship. The fight for humanity's survival was just beginning, and the team knew they would need every ounce of strength and ingenuity to face what came next. As the shuttle sped toward the Resistance base, the team sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. They had risked everything, and they had won, but the cost of victory was a reminder of how much still lay ahead. The darkness of space outside the shuttle's windows seemed endless, but for the first time, it was a darkness they were willing to face. The warship was gone, but the fight for humanity's future was far from over. And as the team prepared for what came next, they knew one thing for certain: they were ready. As the shuttle hurtled away from the crumbling warship, the team sat in stunned silence, the adrenaline of their narrow escape slowly giving way to a cold, creeping dread. The warship's destruction had been a monumental feat, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. But as the debris scattered across the void, Dr. Carter's relief was short-lived. Her eyes were locked on the shuttle's console, where a series of incoming signals began to flash, signals that sent a chill down her spine. "We've got company," Holt said grimly, his hands tightening on the controls. And not the good kind. The screen displayed a cluster of blips, each one representing a new warship identical to the one they had just destroyed. These weren't random arrivals, they were part of a coordinated assault, their trajectories converging on Earth with chilling precision. The team's victory, it seemed, had been a drop in the ocean. Liam leaned forward, his face pale as he studied the data. "There are dozens of them," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe more, they're heading straight for Earth." The weight of his words hung in the air, the implications sinking in with a crushing finality. The aliens weren't just invading, they were overwhelming. Their strategy wasn't about subtlety or infiltration anymore. It was about sheer, unstoppable force, and humanity, fractured and unprepared, was facing an enemy that had planned for this moment for decades. Dr. Carter's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. "This changes everything," she said, her voice steady despite the knot of dread in her chest. "If they're sending this many ships, they're not just planning to conquer Earth, they're planning to dismantle it, to erase us. Holt's jaw tightened as he adjusted the shuttle's course, steering them toward the Resistance base. "We've got to warn the others," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If we don't get ahead of this, we're finished." But as the shuttle sped through the darkness, the team couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The warships were faster, their technology more advanced, and their numbers staggering. The Resistance base, their last bastion of hope, suddenly felt like a fragile outpost in the face of an incoming storm. When they finally reached the base, the mood was tense. Word of their mission had spread, and the survivors gathered in the war room, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. Commander Reyes stood at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the room as Dr. Carter relayed the news. "We've bought ourselves some time," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But not much. The aliens are coming, and they're coming in force. If we don't act now, we won't get another chance." The room erupted into murmurs, the survivors' fear palpable. But amidst the chaos, a flicker of resolve began to emerge. They had faced the impossible before, and they had survived. This time, they would do more than survive, they would fight. As the team began to formulate a plan, Dr. Carter's thoughts turned to the warship they had destroyed. Its destruction had been a victory, but it had also been a warning. The aliens weren't just invaders, they were architects of extinction, and humanity, for all its flaws, wasn't ready to give up without a fight. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. But as the team prepared for what came next, they carried with them the knowledge that they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future. And that was a fight worth dying for. As the team pored over the data retrieved from the warship's core, Dr. Carter's attention was drawn to a series of encrypted files buried deep within the alien system. At first, the data appeared fragmented, a chaotic jumble of symbols and waveforms that defied interpretation. But as she cross-referenced the patterns with the frequency weapons schematics, something extraordinary began to emerge. Hidden within the alien code was a message, a desperate, fragmented plea for survival. The message wasn't meant for humanity. It was a record, a log of the aliens' own history, their struggles, and their ultimate flight from something far more terrifying than anything Earth had ever faced. Dr. Carter's hands trembled as she deciphered the final piece of the puzzle. The invaders weren't conquerors. They were refugees. Their galaxy had been consumed by an unstoppable force, a cataclysm that had driven them to the stars in search of a new home. Earth, with its abundant resources and strategic location, was merely a waypoint in their desperate escape plan. The revelation hit her like a thunderclap. The aliens' relentless assault, their willingness to destroy and repurpose entire civilizations, it wasn't born of malice, but of necessity. They were running from something unimaginable, and Earth stood in their path. Dr. Carter leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with the implications. If the aliens were fleeing a greater threat, then Earth wasn't just a target, it was a battleground. The warships, the hybrids, the infiltration of governments, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. The aliens weren't just trying to conquer Earth, they were trying to secure it as a fortress, a stronghold against whatever was pursuing them. She turned to the team, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've been looking at this all wrong," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. The aliens aren't the real threat, they're running from something worse, something that could destroy us all. The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Holt was the first to speak, his tone sharp with skepticism. "You're saying we've been fighting the wrong enemy?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "Not the wrong enemy, a symptom of a much larger problem. If we don't find a way to stop them, whatever they're running from will follow, and when it does, we'll be caught in the crossfire." The team exchanged uneasy glances, the implications of her discovery rippling through the room. The aliens' invasion wasn't just a threat to Earth, it was a harbinger of something far more catastrophic. And if humanity didn't act soon, they would be swept away in the tide of an intergalactic war they were hopelessly unprepared for. As the team began to strategize, Dr. Carter's mind raced with new possibilities. If the aliens were desperate, then perhaps they could be reasoned with. Or if not, their desperation could be exploited. The key lay in understanding their enemy, not just as invaders, but as survivors. The fight for Earth's survival had taken a darker, more complex turn. But as Dr. Carter stared at the decrypted data, she knew one thing for certain: the stakes had never been higher, and the battle had only just begun. The revelation that the aliens were fleeing an even greater threat changed everything. The team sat in the war room, the air thick with tension, as Dr. Carter laid out the decrypted data. The holographic display flickered with fragmented images of a dying galaxy, planets consumed by an unimaginable force, civilizations reduced to ash. It was clear the aliens weren't just invaders, they were desperate survivors, and if humanity didn't act soon, they'd be caught in the crossfire of an intergalactic war they couldn't hope to survive. "We've been fighting the wrong battle," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady but urgent. "If we can't stop the aliens, we need to turn their own strategy against them. Their technology, their communication systems, could be the key." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. The aliens' vast network of ships and hybrid soldiers relied on a centralized communication system, a web of signals that connected their forces across the galaxy. If they could hijack that system, they could send a distress signal to the very force the aliens were fleeing, the threat that had driven them from their home. It was a gamble, but one with a tantalizing possibility. If the aliens' pursuers were as destructive as the records suggested, they might just see Earth's invaders as the next target. "We'd be playing with fire," Holt said, his arms crossed and his expression grim. "If this backfires, we could be inviting something even worse onto our doorstep." Dr. Carter nodded, acknowledging the risk. "It's not ideal, but right now, we're out of options. The aliens are coming in force, and we don't have the resources to fight them off. If we can turn their enemies against them, we might just buy ourselves enough time to regroup or even survive." The team spent hours poring over the alien schematics, their fingers flying over holographic controls as they worked to decode the invaders' communication protocols. The technology was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, its organic components pulsing faintly as if alive. Every step of the process was fraught with danger. One wrong move, and the signal could alert the aliens to their plan instead of reaching the greater threat. Liam, his face pale but determined, pointed to a series of waveforms on the display. "This is their command frequency. If we can piggyback our signal onto it, we might be able to broadcast far enough to reach whatever's chasing them. But we'll need to amplify it, and fast." The team moved quickly, repurposing the Resistance base's limited resources to create a makeshift transmitter. The alien tech was finicky, its components resistant to human manipulation, but Dr. Carter's expertise proved invaluable. She worked tirelessly, her hands steady despite the growing pressure. As the final connections were made, the room fell silent. The transmitter hummed to life, its organic surface glowing faintly as it prepared to send the signal. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them. "This could save us," Dr. Carter said, her voice low but filled with resolve. Or it could doom us. Either way, it's the only chance we've got. With a deep breath, she activated the transmitter. The signal pulsed outward, a desperate cry for help aimed at the stars. For a moment, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the machine and the oppressive silence of the room. Then, the monitors flickered, the signal registering as it traveled through the alien network. The team held their breath, their eyes locked on the display. The signal was out there now, hurtling through the void toward an unknown enemy. Whether it would save them or destroy them, no one could say. But one thing was certain. The fight for Earth's survival had just entered a new, uncharted phase. As the transmitter fell silent, the weight of their decision settled over the room. They had taken a monumental risk, one that could either turn the tide or plunge them into an even deeper nightmare. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had hope. And in the face of overwhelming odds, that was enough. The Resistance base buzzed with frenetic energy as the final preparations for the coordinated attack were put into place. Maps and holographic displays lit up the war room, their surfaces covered with tactical markers and projected routes. Commander Reyes stood at the center, her voice sharp and commanding as she outlined the plan. "This is it," she said, her gaze sweeping over the assembled fighters. "We hit them hard, fast, and from every angle, keep them occupied, keep them guessing, and give Dr. Carter's team the opening they need." The attack was a gamble, but it was their best shot. The aliens' forces were vast, their technology far superior, but they weren't invincible. The Resistance had learned their weaknesses, their patterns, and their blind spots. Now they were going to exploit them. As the fighters mobilized, Dr. Carter and her team prepared for their own mission. Their objective was the aliens' main communications hub, a heavily fortified structure deep within enemy territory. If they could infiltrate it, they could broadcast the distress signal directly through the alien network, bypassing the need for amplification. It was a high-risk, high-reward operation, and the team knew the stakes. Holt, his face set in a grim mask, handed Dr. Carter a compact device. "This is the signal modulator," he said, his tone leaving no room for error. "Once you're inside, you'll need to upload it directly into their system. It's a one-shot deal, no room for mistakes." Dr. Carter nodded, her grip tightening on the device. "We'll get it done," she said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her chest. The attack began at dawn, the Resistance fighters launching their assault from multiple fronts. Explosions lit up the horizon, the sound of gunfire and alien energy weapons echoing across the battlefield. The aliens, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, scrambled to respond, their hybrid soldiers moving with unnerving precision to counter the Resistance's advance. Amid the chaos, Dr. Carter's team slipped through the shadows, their movements swift and silent. The communications hub loomed ahead, its sleek, organic architecture a stark contrast to the devastation around it. The team moved quickly, their training and instincts guiding them through the labyrinth of alien defenses. As they reached the hub's entrance, a hybrid guard stepped into their path, its glowing eyes locking onto them with predatory focus. Before it could react, Holt fired a precise burst from his weapon, the hybrid crumpling to the ground. "Stay sharp," he muttered, his voice low. "We're not out of the woods yet." Inside, the hub was a marvel of alien engineering, its walls lined with pulsing organic technology. Dr. Carter moved to the central console, her fingers flying over the controls as she worked to upload the signal modulator. The process was fraught with danger. One wrong move, and the entire system could lock them out. The team stood guard, their weapons raised as alien reinforcements closed in. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors, the hybrid snarls growing louder with each passing second. Almost there, Dr. Carter muttered, her voice tight with concentration. The console flickered, the signal modulator's progress bar inching forward. Outside, the resistance fighters held their ground, their determination unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. They fought not just for survival, but for the hope that Dr. Carter's team could turn the tide. As the progress bar reached 100%, the console flared to life, the signal pulsing outward through the alien network. The team didn't wait to see the results. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors as the hybrids gave chase. The mission was far from over, but they had taken the first step. The signal was out there now, a desperate cry for help aimed at the stars. Whether it would save them or doom them, no one could say, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had hope. And in the face of overwhelming odds, that was enough. The team breached the inner sanctum of the alien communications hub, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding as they moved through the pulsating, organic corridors. The air was thick with an unnatural hum, the walls lined with glowing tendrils that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the alien network. Dr. Carter's hands trembled slightly as she connected the signal modulator to the central console, the device's interface flickering to life. The progress bar began its slow crawl, each percentage point a testament to their desperate gamble, but as the signal transmission neared completion, the room's atmosphere shifted. A low, resonant voice filled the air, its tone both commanding and eerily calm. "You believe this will save you," it said, the words echoing as if spoken from every direction at once. The team turned as one, their weapons raised, to face the source of the voice. Emerging from the shadows was a figure unlike any they had encountered before. Tall and imposing, its form was a seamless blend of humanoid and alien features, its glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. This wasn't just another hybrid, it was the alien leader, the architect of the invasion. "Your efforts are futile," the leader continued, its voice layered with an otherworldly resonance. "The moment you made contact, your fate was sealed. You cannot outrun what is coming." Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We're not running, we're fighting. And if that means exposing you to whatever's chasing you, so be it." The alien leader tilted its head, its expression unreadable. "You misunderstand. We are not your enemy, not in the way you think. We are survivors, just as you are. The force that pursues us, it consumes everything. Worlds, civilizations, entire galaxies. It does not discriminate, it does not stop, and now, because of your interference, it will come for you too." The weight of the leader's words settled over the team, the implications sinking in. The aliens hadn't invaded Earth out of malice or greed, they had been driven by sheer, desperate survival. And now, by broadcasting the distress signal, humanity had unwittingly drawn the attention of a far greater threat. Holt's grip tightened on his weapon, his voice sharp with defiance. "You think that's supposed to scare us? We've been fighting for our survival since the day you showed up. Whatever's out there, we'll face it just like we've faced you." The alien leader's gaze lingered on Holt, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Bravery will not save you. Neither will your weapons or your technology. When it arrives, there will be no battle, only extinction." The console behind Dr. Carter beeped sharply, signaling the completion of the signal transmission. The alien leader's expression shifted, a flicker of something akin to frustration crossing its alien features. "You have doomed yourselves," it said, its voice colder now. "And in doing so, you have doomed us all." The team didn't wait for further explanation. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors as the hub's systems began to destabilize. The signal was out there now, hurtling through the void toward an unknown enemy. Whether it would save them or destroy them, no one could say. As they burst into the open air, the horizon lit up with the glow of incoming warships, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like blades. The fight for Earth's survival had taken a darker, more complex turn, and the team knew one thing for certain: the real battle was just beginning. The alien leader's glowing eyes locked onto Dr. Carter, its towering form casting an ominous shadow over the room. The air crackled with tension, the hum of the destabilizing hub adding an eerie backdrop to their confrontation. Dr. Carter stood her ground, her mind racing through every piece of data, every scrap of knowledge they'd gathered about the aliens' vulnerabilities. She knew she couldn't overpower the leader physically, but she didn't need to. She just needed to outsmart it. "You think you've won," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "But you've made one critical mistake. You underestimated us. You thought we were just another primitive species to be conquered, but we've learned how you operate. Your systems, your weaknesses, we've decoded them all." The alien leader tilted its head, its expression unreadable but its posture tense. "You believe your knowledge gives you an advantage," it replied, its voice layered with that unnerving resonance. "But you cannot comprehend the forces at play. You are insects scrambling in the shadow of giants." Dr. Carter's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "Maybe, but even insects can bring down a giant if they know where to bite." She reached into her pack, pulling out a small device, a modified version of the frequency weapon they'd used before. Its surface pulsed faintly, its design a blend of human ingenuity and alien technology. "This won't just disrupt your systems, it'll scramble them completely. Your network, your hybrids, your ships, everything you've built here will collapse." For a moment, the leader didn't respond. Then, its glowing eyes narrowed and it raised a hand. The walls around them began to shift, the organic material rippling as the hub responded to its command. "You are resourceful," it admitted, its tone colder now. "But you have forced my hand. If Earth cannot be our fortress, it will be our shield." Before Dr. Carter could react, the leader activated a fail-safe. The ground beneath them trembled, the air growing thick with a strange, acrid scent. Outside, the horizon began to change, the sky darkening as massive structures emerged from the ground, their surfaces glistening with an unnatural sheen. The aliens weren't just retreating, they were terraforming Earth, reshaping it into a lifeless husk that could serve as a barrier against the force pursuing them. Dr. Carter's heart sank as she realized what was happening. The leader wasn't bluffing. It was willing to destroy Earth entirely if it meant buying itself more time to escape. She turned to her team, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to stop this now. If they complete the terraforming process, there won't be anything left to save." The team moved quickly, their training and instincts kicking in as they fought to regain control of the hub. The alien leader watched them, its expression unreadable but its posture tense. "You cannot stop what has already begun," it said, its voice echoing through the chamber. "This world is already lost." But Dr. Carter wasn't ready to give up. She activated the frequency weapon, its pulse resonating through the hub and disrupting the leader's control. The terraforming process slowed, the massive structures outside shuddering as their energy flow was interrupted. It wasn't enough to stop it completely, but it bought them time. Precious, fleeting time. As the team worked to stabilize the hub, Dr. Carter turned to face the leader one last time. "You think you're the only ones who know how to fight back," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But you're wrong. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our resilience, and we're not done fighting yet." The leader's glowing eyes flickered, its expression shifting for the first time. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even respect. But it didn't respond. Instead, it turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the team to face the daunting task of undoing the damage it had set in motion. The fight for Earth's survival had reached a critical turning point, and the stakes had never been higher. But as Dr. Carter and her team worked to reverse the terraforming process, they knew one thing for certain: they weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for the very soul of their world, and that was a fight worth every ounce of strength they had left. The hub's walls pulsed erratically, the alien technology buckling under the strain of the frequency weapon. Dr. Carter's hands moved swiftly over the console, her fingers dancing across the interface as she worked to stabilize the systems. The weapon's pulse had disrupted the terraforming process, but it hadn't stopped it completely. Outside, the massive structures that had begun to rise from the ground now stood frozen mid-formation, their surfaces glistening faintly under the darkened sky. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of alien energy. "We've slowed it down," Liam said, his voice tight with urgency as he monitored the readings. "But the atmosphere is destabilizing. If we don't find a way to reverse this, the damage could be permanent." Dr. Carter's mind raced. The aliens' terraforming technology wasn't just reshaping the planet's surface, it was altering the very composition of the atmosphere, replacing breathable air with a toxic blend of alien gases. The process had been partially halted, but the damage was already spreading. "We need to recalibrate the weapon," she said, her tone sharp with focus. "If we can amplify its frequency, we might be able to neutralize the alien tech completely." The team worked quickly, their movements precise and deliberate. Holt secured the perimeter, his weapon raised as he kept watch for any signs of alien reinforcements. The hub's corridors were eerily silent, the hum of the destabilizing systems the only sound. But the silence was deceptive. They all knew the aliens wouldn't give up without a fight. As Dr. Carter adjusted the weapon's settings, the console flickered, its holographic displays showing the extent of the damage. The atmosphere's oxygen levels were dropping rapidly, replaced by a cocktail of nitrogen and methane that would render Earth uninhabitable within hours. The terraforming process wasn't just a threat to humanity, it was a death sentence for the planet itself. "We're running out of time," Liam said, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. "If we don't act now, it won't matter if we stop the aliens. Earth won't be able to sustain life." Dr. Carter's jaw tightened as she input the final adjustments. The frequency weapon flared to life, its pulse resonating through the hub and out into the alien network. The frozen structures outside shuddered, their surfaces cracking as the energy flow was disrupted. For a moment, it seemed like the weapon was working. The terraforming process slowed, the atmosphere's destabilization stabilizing, but then the hub's systems began to fail. The lights flickered, the hum of the alien tech growing louder and more erratic. The weapon's pulse had overloaded the network, and the hub was on the verge of collapse. "We need to get out of here," Holt said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If this place goes down, we're taking the whole network with it." The team didn't hesitate. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors as the hub's systems began to collapse around them. The ground trembled, the walls cracking as the alien tech buckled under the strain. Outside, the frozen structures began to crumble, their massive forms collapsing into dust. As they burst into the open air, the horizon was a chaotic blend of light and shadow. The atmosphere was still unstable, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds and alien energy. The terraforming process had been halted, but the damage was done. Earth's atmosphere was teetering on the brink of collapse, and the team knew they had only bought themselves a temporary reprieve. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. The aliens had been thwarted, but the cost of their victory was a planet on the edge of ruin. As the team regrouped, their eyes turned to the darkened sky, the weight of their next challenge pressing down on them. They had stopped the terraforming process, but the battle for Earth's survival was far from won. And now, with the atmosphere unstable and time running out, they would need to find a way to undo the damage, or face the consequences of a world that could no longer sustain life. The horizon above Earth erupted in a spectacle unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. The sky, once darkened by the alien terraforming process, now blazed with streaks of light as the distress signal reverberated through the void, reaching the ears, or whatever passed for them, of the greater threat the invaders had been fleeing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A fleet of colossal alien ships emerged from the depths of space, their forms sleek and menacing, yet distinctly different from the organic, pulsating architecture of the invaders. These newcomers were angular and mechanical, their surfaces glinting with a cold, metallic sheen. They moved with a precision that was almost surgical, their formations tight and deliberate. It was clear this was no ragtag group of survivors. This was a force designed for annihilation. The battle began without warning. Energy beams crisscrossed the atmosphere, their blinding light casting eerie shadows across the Earth's surface. The invaders' warships scrambled to respond, their organic hulls rippling as they unleashed torrents of bioluminescent plasma. The newcomers, however, were relentless. Their weapons tore through the invaders' defenses with terrifying efficiency, their technology a stark contrast to the biological hybrid nature of their foes. From the surface, the resistance watched in awe and terror. Dr. Carter and her team stood at the heart of the chaos, their eyes fixed on the sky. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of explosions. "The signal worked, but now we're caught in the middle of a war we can't win." The battle above was more than just a clash of titans, it was a turning point. The invaders, once an unstoppable force, were now on the defensive. Their ships, once symbols of dread, were being torn apart by the newcomers' relentless assault. The resistance seized the opportunity, launching their own counterattacks against the remaining alien forces on the ground. The hybrids, their connection to the invaders' network disrupted, faltered and fell, their glowing eyes flickering out one by one. But the victory was bittersweet. The newcomers' arrival had given humanity a chance, but it had also introduced a new, even more formidable threat. Their motives were unclear, their intentions even more so. Were they saviors, drawn by the distress signal to eliminate a common enemy? Or were they simply the next wave of destruction, here to claim Earth for themselves? As the battle raged on, Dr. Carter's mind raced. She knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had survived the invaders' assault, but now they faced an even greater challenge, navigating the aftermath of a war that had thrust them into the center of an intergalactic conflict. The skies above Earth were no longer a sanctuary, they were a battlefield, and the fight for survival had just entered a new, uncharted phase. The resistance regrouped, their determination unshaken. They had faced the impossible before, and they would do so again, but as the newcomers' fleet loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the ravaged Earth, one thing was certain: the stakes had never been higher. Humanity had been given a chance to fight back, but the cost of that chance was a world forever changed. The battle above Earth was a spectacle of destruction, but it was also a beacon of hope. For the first time, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their place in a universe far larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And as the skies burned with the light of 1,000 battles, one truth became clear: the fight for Earth's future had only just begun. The Resistance base buzzed with a frenetic energy as Dr. Carter and her team prepared for the final assault. The frequency weapon, now fully operational, sat at the center of their strategy, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The alien fleet, though diminished by the newcomers' relentless assault, still posed a significant threat. Their remaining ships loomed in the atmosphere, their organic hulls pulsating with a malevolent light as they regrouped for a counterattack. The Resistance knew this was their chance, their last, best opportunity to strike a decisive blow and reclaim Earth from the invaders. Commander Reyes stood at the head of the war room, her sharp eyes scanning the holographic displays that detailed the alien fleet's positions. "This is it," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We hit them hard, fast, and with everything we've got. The frequency weapon is our ace in the hole. Use it to disable their ships, and we'll turn the tide." Dr. Carter adjusted the weapon's settings, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The device hummed faintly, its organic components glowing with an eerie light. "The weapon will emit a pulse that disrupts their neural networks," she explained, her tone both confident and urgent. "It'll take out their ships, but we'll need to get close." Too close for comfort. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. They knew the risks. Getting within range of the alien fleet meant exposing themselves to their devastating weaponry. But they also knew the stakes. If they didn't act now, the invaders would regroup and Earth would be lost. As the assault began, the Resistance fighters launched their attack from multiple fronts. The sky lit up with explosions, the sound of gunfire and alien energy weapons echoing across the battlefield. The aliens, caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault, scrambled to respond, their hybrid soldiers moving with unnerving precision to counter the Resistance's advance. Amid the chaos, Dr. Carter's team slipped through the shadows, their movements swift and silent. The frequency weapon, now mounted on a modified transport vehicle, pulsed faintly as they approached the heart of the alien fleet. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the weapon blending with the distant roar of battle. As they neared their target, a hybrid guard stepped into their path, its glowing eyes locking onto them with predatory focus. Before it could react, Holt fired a precise burst from his weapon, the hybrid crumpling to the ground. "Stay sharp," he muttered, his voice low. "We're not out of the woods yet." Inside the transport, Dr. Carter worked feverishly to stabilize the weapon's output. The device was finicky, its organic components resistant to human manipulation, but she didn't let that deter her. Every second counted, and she knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. Finally, they reached the optimal range. The alien fleet loomed overhead, their massive forms casting long shadows across the battlefield. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Let's give them everything we've got." With a decisive motion, she activated the weapon. The pulse resonated through the air, its frequency disrupting the alien ship's neural networks. One by one, the ships faltered, their organic hulls rippling as their systems were overwhelmed. The Resistance fighters seized the opportunity, their weapons flashing as they pressed the advantage. The tide of the battle shifted in an instant. The aliens, once an unstoppable force, were now on the defensive. Their ships, once symbols of dread, were being torn apart by the Resistance's relentless assault. The hybrids, their connection to the invaders' network disrupted, faltered and fell, their glowing eyes flickering out one by one. As the dust settled, the Resistance regrouped, their determination unshaken. They had faced the impossible before, and they had survived. But as the alien fleet retreated, their organic hulls crumbling into dust, one thing was certain: the fight for Earth's survival was far from over. The frequency weapon had given them a chance, but the cost of that chance was a world forever changed. The skies above Earth were no longer a sanctuary, they were a battlefield. And as the Resistance prepared for what came next, they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. The alien leader's towering form crumpled to the ground, its glowing eyes flickering out as the frequency weapon's pulse overwhelmed its systems. The room fell silent, the oppressive hum of the alien hub fading into a dull, lifeless thrum. Dr. Carter stood amidst the wreckage, her breath shallow, her mind racing with a mix of relief and dread. They had won, but at what cost? The alien invasion had been halted, their leader defeated, yet the victory felt hollow. The greater threat, the force that had driven the aliens to Earth in the first place, was still out there. And now, with the invaders neutralized, it was beginning to turn its attention to humanity. The monitors flickered, their screens displaying the remnants of the alien fleet drifting lifelessly in the atmosphere. But something else caught Dr. Carter's eye, a new signal, faint but unmistakable, pulsing through the void. It was coming from the edge of the solar system, its trajectory unmistakable: Earth. The newcomers, the force that had decimated the alien fleet, were no longer content to linger in the shadows. They were coming. Dr. Carter's stomach churned as the implications sank in. Humanity had survived one apocalypse only to face another. The newcomers weren't saviors, they were predators, drawn by the chaos of the battle and the vulnerability of a weakened Earth. Their technology was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, their motives inscrutable, but one thing was clear: they weren't here to negotiate. "We need to act," Dr. Carter said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "If we don't unite, if we don't prepare, we won't survive what's coming." The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of her words pressing down on them. They had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival, it was about the survival of an entire species. And time was running out. Dr. Carter turned to the communication console, her fingers flying over the controls. The Resistance base's systems were still operational, though barely. She activated the global broadcast, her face appearing on screens across the planet. Her voice, steady but urgent, echoed through the airwaves. "This is Dr. Elena Carter," she began, her tone commanding yet filled with an undercurrent of desperation. "We've defeated the alien invaders, but the fight isn't over. A greater threat is coming, one that could destroy us all. I'm asking no, I'm begging for unity. We can't afford to be divided anymore, not now, not when the stakes are this high." The broadcast continued, her words resonating with a raw, unflinching honesty. She spoke of the newcomers, their technology, their destructive capabilities. She spoke of the need for cooperation, for humanity to set aside its differences and face this new danger together. Her plea was simple but profound. Survival depended on their ability to unite. The response was immediate. Across the globe, survivors emerged from the shadows, their faces pale but resolute. Governments, long fractured and isolated, began to reach out to one another. Resistance groups, once operating independently, began to coordinate their efforts. For the first time in what felt like forever, humanity was coming together. But Dr. Carter knew it wasn't enough. Unity was a start, but it wouldn't save them. They needed a plan, a way to fight back against a force that seemed unstoppable. As the team regrouped, their eyes turned to the darkened sky, the weight of their next challenge pressing down on them. The fight for Earth's survival had entered a new, more dangerous phase. The alien leader had been defeated, but the cost of that victory was a world on the brink of ruin. And now, with the newcomers closing in, humanity faced its greatest test yet. Dr. Carter's plea had been heard, but the real battle was just beginning. The skies above Earth were no longer a sanctuary, they were a battlefield. And as the resistance prepared for what came next, they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. The resistance broadcast crackled across the airwaves, its signal cutting through the static of a world still reeling from the alien invasion. Dr. Carter's voice, steady but urgent, echoed from every screen, every radio, every device still connected to the remnants of Earth's shattered communication networks. Her words were a rallying cry, a desperate plea for unity in the face of an even greater threat. "This is Dr. Elena Carter," she began, her tone commanding yet filled with an undercurrent of desperation. "The alien invaders have been defeated, but the fight isn't over. A greater danger is coming, one that could destroy us all. I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for humanity to unite. We cannot afford to be divided anymore, not now, not when the stakes are this high." Her message was clear, her urgency palpable. She laid out the facts with stark clarity. The newcomers, the force that had decimated the alien fleet, were not saviors. They were predators, drawn by the chaos of the battle and the vulnerability of a weakened Earth. Their technology was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, their motives inscrutable. But one thing was certain: they were coming, and they weren't here to negotiate. The broadcast resonated with a raw, unflinching honesty. Dr. Carter spoke of the need for cooperation, for humanity to set aside its differences and face this new danger together. Her plea was simple but profound. Survival depended on their ability to unite. The response was immediate and mixed. Across the globe, survivors emerged from the shadows, their faces pale but resolute. Governments, long fractured and isolated, began to reach out to one another. Resistance groups, once operating independently, began to coordinate their efforts. For the first time in what felt like forever, humanity was coming together, but not everyone was willing to listen. In the ruins of what was once New York City, a group of survivors huddled around a flickering screen, their faces etched with skepticism. "What does she know?" one man muttered, his voice thick with distrust. "We've been fighting for months, and now she wants us to trust the same people who left us to die." Elsewhere, in the remnants of a government bunker, a high-ranking official dismissed the broadcast with a wave of his hand. "This is fear-mongering," he declared, his tone dismissive. "We've survived the aliens. We'll survive whatever comes next. We don't need to throw away our sovereignty for some vague threat." The resistance's plea for unity was met with resistance of its own fractured alliances, deep-seated mistrust, and the scars of a world that had been torn apart. Dr. Carter's message had struck a chord, but it had also exposed the cracks in humanity's fragile foundation. As the broadcast continued, Dr. Carter's voice grew more urgent. "This isn't just about survival," she said, her tone sharp with conviction. "This is about our future. If we don't come together now, if we don't prepare, we won't just lose Earth, we'll lose ourselves." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. The Resistance had bought humanity a chance, but that chance was slipping away. The newcomers were closing in, their arrival inevitable, and as the world grappled with the truth of what lay ahead, one thing was clear: the fight for Earth's survival wasn't just against an external threat. It was against the divisions that threatened to tear humanity apart. The broadcast ended, but its message lingered, a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink of despair. The Resistance had laid the groundwork for unity, but the real battle, the battle for humanity's soul, was just beginning, and as the skies above Earth darkened with the approach of the newcomers, the question remained: would humanity rise to the challenge, or would it fall to its own divisions? The answer, as Dr. Carter knew all too well, would determine the fate of the world. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the Resistance base's failing systems. Dr. Carter stood alone, her gaze fixed on the holographic display that showed the remnants of the alien fleet drifting lifelessly in the atmosphere. The battle was over, the invaders defeated, but the weight of their victory pressed down on her like a physical force. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment to grieve, for the lives lost, for the world that had been irrevocably changed, for the friends and colleagues who had sacrificed everything to buy humanity this fleeting chance. Liam, Holt, so many others, their faces flashed in her mind, their voices echoing in the stillness. They had fought not just for survival, but for the hope of a future. And now, standing in the aftermath, Dr. Carter couldn't help but wonder if they had done enough. The alien leader was gone, its fleet in ruins, but the cost had been staggering. Entire cities lay in ruins, their streets eerily silent. The atmosphere, though stabilized, bore the scars of the terraforming process, its composition forever altered. And the survivors, those who had endured the invasion, the battles, the loss, were now faced with an even greater threat. Her reflection was interrupted by the soft chime of the console. The display flickered, its holographic interface showing a new signal, a faint but unmistakable pulse emanating from the edge of the solar system, the newcomers. They were closer now, their trajectory unmistakable. Dr. Carter's stomach churned as the implications sank in. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. She turned away from the console, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. The Resistance had given humanity a chance, but that chance was slipping away. The newcomers weren't just another enemy, they were a force of nature, their technology and motives beyond comprehension. And yet, as daunting as the challenge seemed, Dr. Carter knew they couldn't afford to falter. Her hand brushed against the frequency weapon, its surface cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. It had been their greatest weapon against the aliens, but would it be enough against this new threat? She didn't know. What she did know was that they couldn't face it alone. Unity wasn't just a lofty ideal, it was a necessity. The broadcast had been a start, but it wasn't enough. They needed more. They needed to rebuild, to prepare, to fight not just for survival, but for the very soul of humanity. As she stepped out into the base's central hub, the air was thick with tension. Survivors moved with purpose, their faces pale but resolute. The broadcast had struck a chord, but the divisions ran deep: mistrust, fear, and the scars of a shattered world threatened to tear them apart. Dr. Carter knew they couldn't afford to let that happen. She approached a group of resistance fighters, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We've come this far," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet urgency. "We've faced the impossible and survived, but the fight isn't over. The newcomers are coming, and we need to be ready. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who didn't make it this far, for Liam, for Holt, for all of them." Her words hung in the air, a reminder of the stakes. The fighters nodded, their resolve hardening. They knew what was at stake. They knew the cost of failure, and as they turned back to their tasks, Dr. Carter allowed herself a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. But as she looked out at the survivors, their faces etched with the scars of battle but still filled with determination, she knew one thing for certain: they weren't alone. The fight for Earth's survival wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about holding on to what made them human: their resilience, their compassion, their unyielding will to survive. And as the horizon darkened with the approach of the newcomers, Dr. Carter vowed to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before. The cost of their victory had been high, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that humanity's story didn't end here. The audiobook concludes with a moment of quiet reflection, a rare pause in the relentless storm that has defined Dr. Carter's journey. She stands atop the skeletal remains of a once thriving city, its towering skyscrapers now jagged silhouettes against a bruised, twilight sky. The air is heavy with the acrid scent of smoke and the faint hum of alien technology still lingering in the distance. Her boots crunch against shattered glass and twisted metal as she steps forward, her eyes fixed on the heavens above. The stars, once a source of wonder and hope, now feel cold and distant, their light dimmed by the shadows of what's to come. In her hand, she clutches a small device, its screen flickering faintly as it picks up a new signal, one she had hoped never to see. The display pulses with an unfamiliar pattern, a rhythm that sends a chill down her spine. It's not the erratic, organic hum of the alien invaders they've just defeated. This signal is different, colder, more precise, and infinitely more menacing. It's a harbinger of the greater threat, the force that had driven the aliens to Earth in their desperate flight for survival. Dr. Carter's breath fogs in the chilled air as she whispers, her voice barely audible over the faint rustle of wind through the ruins. The real invasion has only just begun. Her words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. The battle they've fought, the sacrifices they've made, they were just the opening act. The true test of humanity's resilience, its capacity to survive and adapt, lies ahead. Her gaze shifts from the stars to the horizon, where the faint glow of the resistance base's lights flickers in the distance. The survivors there, the ones who had answered her call for unity, are now the last hope for a world on the brink. She thinks of Liam, Holt, and the countless others who had given everything to buy humanity this fragile chance. Their sacrifices had not been in vain, but they had also not been enough to secure victory. The newcomers, with their incomprehensible technology and inscrutable motives, are a force unlike anything humanity has ever faced. As she turns to make her way back to the base, the weight of her responsibility presses down on her. She knows what's at stake, not just the survival of humanity, but the preservation of everything that makes them human. The newcomers aren't just another enemy to defeat. They are a challenge to humanity's very identity, a test of its ability to rise above its divisions and unite against a common threat. The journey back is long and arduous, the ruins of the city a stark reminder of the cost of their victory. But as she walks, Dr. Carter finds a flicker of hope amidst the despair. The survivors, though battered and broken, are still standing. They've faced the impossible and emerged scarred but unbroken. And as she steps into the base, the faces of those who remain, their determination, their resilience remind her that the fight isn't over. The signal on her device continues to pulse, a relentless reminder of what's coming. But as she looks around the room, at the people who have chosen to stand together, she knows one thing for certain: humanity isn't ready to give up. The real invasion may have only just begun, but so too has humanity's resolve to fight for its future. And in that resolve, there is hope. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with a sense of both closure and anticipation. The story of Dr. Carter and humanity's struggle against overwhelming odds is far from over, but it's a story worth telling, and one worth fighting for.